Dies. A person who summons a ghost can choose one of two ways to do so. There's the safer option. Summoning the spirit under good circumstances. One way to make it safe would be cleansing the room you're doing it in while purifying the area. An extra would be a protection spell on the side. Then there's the reckless option. Calling the spirit by force, almost shackling the ghost to themselves. This summoning does not protect the summoner. This allows the spirit to be able to harm the summoner. It is extremely dangerous. Now, Nezu is a smart being. He had one of the highest IQs in the fucking world after all. Nezu was safe while summoning Izuku. For his knowledge on the supernatural was rather supreme, Nezu knew Midoriya's spirit had very bad intentions. In fact, the rodent principal had encountered beings like Izuku before, except none have ever been as powerful nor were they that violent. So he was extra careful. Nezu's went so far as to place a binding spell on the ghost. Let's try this one out, Does it suit your taste? Izuku mocked, holding up pliers dangerously close to Nezu's twitching ears, his face contorted with an unknown darkness. Izuku expected Nezu be trembling with fear, begging for his life and whatnot. But that was hardly the case. Nezu showed no emotion. His beady black eyes covered any sort of thought or reaction. The ghost was conflicted. Did I break you or something? He giggled, lowering the pliers on his right ear. In an instant, Nezu raised his paw and made a hand sign which he simplified to use for himself, accompanied with a type of warding chant. A sudden gust of unknown force entered the ghost's body, making him slam his back against the cement wall. Izuku didn't feel pain, but for some reason he felt something chaining him down, as if invisible chuckles had restrained his limbs. My, it works. I was actually starting to get worried. Meanwhile, in the most secure prison in Japan, Tartarus. Let me see him, got him it, an angry Inko screamed, her eyebrows knitted with frustration as she held the guard's collar. Inko had changed rather drastically after her meeting with her dead son. She stopped eating, don't do that, and started training to get her mind off what had happened. As a result, Inko lost a lot of weight and gained muscle. You could even say she looked even better than before she had Izuku. The woman had cut her hair in a short bob which only complemented her new look even more. Hold on, miss, you have to have a permit to visit him. The guard panicked as Inko's grip grew tighter on his collar, now lifting him slightly off the floor. If you don't. Hold on, what's the problem here? A sudden guard intercepted their rambling. He was obviously of higher authority than the other. This lady is demanding to see All Might, but we can't simply let her in. He shouted, a little frightened to be honest. Inko huffed and let him go, making the guard stumble and fit his uniform with a relieved sigh. I need to speak with him, please. She was not looking at the other guard. He took out a sort of device and started typing something. What's your name, ma'am? Inko crossed her arms while glaring at the two, Inko Midoriya. That's when it clicked for the guard, mother of Izuku Midoriya, the kid that went missing. The lady narrowed her eyes. He never went missing, bastard. He's dead and I need answers from All Might. And you're going to let me in? Inko used her quirk to push the guard towards her, his body growing green as they were face to face. I'll have to file you in the system. It'll take a while. Do you want to wait? The man could sympathize with her. He had a daughter around the age of 16 when she committed suicide. He knew the pain of losing a child all too well. Yes, I'll wait, thank you so much. Now back at UA, a certain someone was panicking. Izuku had managed to escape just before Nezu could harm him anymore with the connection spells he casted. Aizawa, I need you, Izuku yelled, floating to the teacher at speed while he was alone in the teacher's lounge, enjoying a peaceful moment to himself. His transparent face was distraught, completely black eyes alert with worry. The teacher groaned and took a swig of his coffee. I've just finished blackmailing Tamaki for you. What else do you need? Aizawa groaned, rolling his eyes with annoyance. Izuku snorted, geez, who pissed in your cereal? Anyways, I need a favor. His whole personality seemed to change for some reason. Aizawa just sighed at the silly comeback. After all, Izuku was a child still. a dead one but still a child. "What do you need me to do, Midoriya?" Aizawa finally gave in. The ghost beamed and wrapped his weightless arm around the teacher's shoulder. "I need you to kill someone. Can you do it?" Aizawa was a little bit stunned. He had to admit, deep in his mind, Shota imagined it. How it would be to kill a person, watching their ought fade away like a dying candle, the visual of blood and the resentment that came with death. Lord, how he yearned to try it at least once. Aizawa got excited just thinking about it. But on the downside, he was afraid. Shota was a hero, for God's sake. He should be saving people, not killing them. What if he got caught by the police? His whole life would be ruined. But then again, maybe he could trust Izuku to help him out of any potential sticky situations. Not a bad idea. "Who is it?" Shota asked with an eyebrow raise. Secretly, his excitement was rising, heart rate increasing in the silent room. "The rat. He knows about us. He knows about me, and I can't kill him because of some witchy voodoo shit. You have to be the one to kill him." Aizawa froze, hearing it was Nezu that needed to be killed, and he knew about his connection with Izuku. If he told someone else, things would get bad. "When should I do it?" Aizawa relied simply, complying to the request without much conflict. Izuku smiled widely and hopped into the air. "Yahoo! Let's go now. We can invite Amajiki as well. Tilda. Punishment. Fuck off, Mum. Can't you leave me alone for 1 second? Katsuki, don't talk to your mother like that. You're such a brat," Mitsuki Bakugo roared, hitting her son over the head out of pure rage. "Hey, you to stop it for a second, will ya?" His dad tried to uselessly stop the argument, grabbing his wife's arm in protest. However, she responded by shoving it off and ignoring him completely. "What a disorderly family. If you weren't on my ass all the time, then I wouldn't get mad, you old hag." The blonde-haired teen shook with anger, grabbing a plate which was in the kitchen as his face knotted together. "Katsuki, don't you dare throw that plate, or I swear to God I'll kill you," Mitsuki growled, pointing her finger at the teen. "Oh, there's no need to do that, Mitsuki-kun. That's my job." "I fucking dare you. Go ahead and see what'll happen," she hissed, standing in front of her husband. Katsuki huffed. "It's not even that big of a deal, you hag," he grumbled before ignorantly dropping the plate and walking off, the shards smashing all over the kitchen floor. "Katsuki Bakugo, you're paying for this right now. Get your ass here, brat." Masaru gasped and started to carefully clean up the sharp shards before Mitsuki slapped his hand away again. "No way, this brat is cleaning his mess up." Mitsuki stormed up the stairs to Bakugo's room while he leaned on the fridge unfazed while watching his dad subtly take away more of the dangerous pieces. "PFT, I ain't cleaning that shit up," Katsuki sighed while waiting for his mum to come back. "Please try to make up with your mother, it's giving me a headache," Masaru begged, wondering what his wife was doing in Katsuki's room. "Whatever, she started it," he rolled his eyes. "Katsuki Bakugo." Finally the woman came storming down the stairs, this time holding something in her hand. "Ooh, this is gonna get interesting. I wonder how Sensei is doing with Nezu." "You stay up here, it's gonna get messy," and Midoriya didn't want you getting all stressed for some reason. Shota gestured Tamaki onto his sofa, leaving the third year with his coffee machine and the TV on so it blocked out any sound, more specifically screams. Tamaki grabbed a blanket and started to make himself a hot chocolate once the teacher left the room, simply accepting the fact that he couldn't do much about this predicament. After all, his friends were just murdered in front of his eyes by a ghost who turned out to be working with a teacher. Yes, a little bit random and fucked up, but that's just how this story goes. "I wonder what he's doing," Tamaki thought, a little bit scared while taking a delicate sip of the hot drink and curling himself in a protective blanket. "I had an idea you were working with him. I'm not surprised, really, Shota." Nezu was sat in the middle of the room, his hand and upper arm covered in dry blood from where Izuku stabbed him. Shota sighed and ran his hand down his face in annoyance. "Whatever, you deserve what's coming to you." "Was it really your dream to become a villain, Shota?" Nezu asked monotonously. Aizawa lowered his tar-black eyes, handing a small cup of tea to the principal. seemingly unfazed by what the rodent said. Your last drink, make it count. Nezu, the teacher, sat cross-legged opposite the other and watched silently as he took a gentle sip. Do I not get a last meal? Nezu joked, slurping at the tea again. Unfortunately not. I'm pushing it by just giving you a drink. Midoriya will make you into a fur hat once I've killed you. Aizawa rolled his eyes up to the cement ceiling, looking around at the tools Izuku left in his basement before he had to flee. I think I'll make an excellent hat, perhaps even a scarf, Nezu smiled. Aizawa was surprised at how normal Nezu was acting. Too small for a scarf, Shota responded simply, avoiding eye contact. Nezu laughed rather weirdly. Oh, you're probably right, Shota. Midoriya should be glad he has you. I'd be able to control him if you weren't here. Such a shame that I didn't think my plan, though. Aizawa raised an eyebrow, his mind coming up without the mental image of a twisted fantasy. Nezu was unrecognizable, organs spilled across the cement floor, the small mass of twitching muscle, ligaments and bones in the middle of it all. To the side was a disgusting pile of drenched white fur. Shota. Aizawa was brought back to reality by the principal's calm voice, the horrific image vanishing again. Have you finished? The male pointed at the small teacup, to which Nezu responded by nodding his head and placing it on the floor. Do what you must. I'm looking forward to what torture feels like. Nezu grinned madly, his nose twitching with excitement. Aizawa scrunched his face in grotesque before standing up again. I always knew you were a psycho. Anyways, Midoriya wanted me to give you two options, strangulation or being beat to death. Aizawa held up two fingers to emphasize his point. Oh, how exciting. I know how he chose these. That's how he died, right? Beaten before being suffocated. How clever. Nezu rubbed his chin in thought, making Shota question the rodent's sanity again. If you can't choose, I'd like to beat you. It would be nice to see you bleed after all. You really are a little bitch, Shota. Midoriya is your owner. You're just a dog doing its master's duties. Nezu decided to pull a few strings within his mind. Shota remained monotone, however the subtle clench of his fist said otherwise. Have I pulled a nerve? Nezu was cut off by a kick to the face. You didn't see Midoriya in that damn alleyway. I was the one to gather his unrecognizable body and dismembered wings to hide for your benefit. You really do disgust me, Aizawa hissed, his hair floating as eyes glowed red. Nezu wiped a streak of blood from his nose with an eerie smile. Oh, I'm sure you enjoyed it, seeing as how you enjoyed doing this to me. Aizawa narrowed his eyes. I wish I could have protected him, something a rodent like you wouldn't understand. Shota grabbed his capture gear and wrapped it around the principal, slamming his body against the wall with great satisfaction. Nezu coughed blood, his shoulder dislocated in agony. Maybe you're right, a rodent like me doesn't understand. And I never will, he laughed as best he could. Shota picked him up with his capture gear again and tightened it so much that you could hear his ribs crack. It won't take long to kill you with this small body, he spoke while immersing himself in Nezu's animalistic squeaks of pain. The smaller wheezed, a rib most likely puncturing his lung. I hope you get caught and rot, Nezu yelled out as Aizawa tightened his gear even more, inner organs slowly bleeding out. You're looking a little faint there, Nezu. Everything all right? Shota took pleasure in slowly draining his life away, pressing his finger on the principal's bulging black eyes, his mouth agape in attempts to gather any available air. Aizawa moved his hand to Nezu's tail, grabbing it at the base. How about a deal? A tail for a pair of wings, eh? Sounds fair to me. Puppet. You have to listen, Miss Midoriya. I'm completely innocent and I have no idea what happened to young Izuku. He went missing. Inko looked at the chained ex-pro hero with disgust, his whole body locked with quirk suppressants and iron. I don't care if you're innocent or not. That's not why I'm here, she demanded again, getting closer to the thick glass which separated them both. All Might narrowed his eyes at the now muscular woman. Again, I know nothing about your son. He was never found, so there's a chance he could still. Shut up, don't you feed me with fake hope like everyone did, you sick bastard. My son is dead because of the lack of protection and discipline you and your coworkers failed to provide. Toshinori sighed, the metal around his mouth making it rather hard to talk with the furious mother. Don't lie to me, please. I just want to know the truth and I'll get justice for my baby. I beg of you. All Might thought he was technically classed as the most dangerous villain right now. So what harm would become of him telling this woman the truth about her son? It's not like All Might's luck could get any worse at this point. Young Izuku was a reject at UA. All teachers hated him. It was like he was some sort of beacon for hate to swirl and fester. The poor boy only got in because of his amazingly high grade in the entrance exams. He had superb control of his quirk and its limitations. Yes, I know, he worked for hours every day just to get a chance at that school. Why did everyone hate him? Inko's eyes started to blossom with sorrowful tears. Honestly, I don't have a clue. Like I was saying, I did notice he didn't have many friends. In fact, he was like the plaything of UA. I never thought the bullying to get that bad. I guess I'm a part to blame. It seemed ignoring the situation was not the best idea on my part. Toshinori shrugged his shoulders in dismissal before continuing, ignoring the rage-filled expression Inko wore. Katsuki Bakugo was one of Izuku's main tormentors, I think. Inko gasped, her hands trembling. No, that's not true. Katsuki and Izuku have always been best friends. Izuku always hid this factor from his mother, determined to not worry her any more than she always was. Well, he was lying to you then. Anyways, long story short, it was accidental manslaughter. A bunch of kids ganged up on him one night and took it too far. We hid the body out of precaution for UA. Guess that doesn't matter anymore since it could be potentially shut down anyways. It was true, the news had been plastered with debated and interviews on the recent events going on in the school, and whether the police will forcefully close it down till everything is solved. You took my baby's body. If you knew and let all these horrible things happen to him, why, I don't understand at all. You're supposed to be a hero. By now it seemed like an everlasting stream of tears glided down Inko's freckled cheeks, her eyes red with emotion. Miss, your time is over, a guard tried to interrupt, however he was quickly ignored. A hero? Yes I am, but look at me right now. Do I look heroic at all? It fucking sucks in here. Honestly, I couldn't care less about your freak of a child. I forgot about him long ago. All Might spat, trying to move underneath his restraints. It seemed he had finally shown his true colors. Inko shook with rage, swinging her fist at the reinforced glass blindly. Fuck you. You can rot in here for the rest of your life like the piece of shit you are. Ma'am, I'm going to have to escort you out now. The guard started to drag her away from All Might's shallow laughter. Shoto Aizawa sat at home happy and content. His first kill had been an enjoyable one. The remains were still laying in his basement. He was keeping them there till Izuku came back from the Bakugo's house, just to show his ghost friend what a splendid job he did. However, one thing was bothering Aizawa. Move over a little, will you? You're taking up all the sofa, the teacher sighed after taking a shower to wash the blood off himself, going to join a certain scared third year watching TV in his living room. Sorry, he mumbled while squishing himself so far into the corner that he could fall off any second. Tamaki had probably consumed about 10 hot chocolates and watched half of Demon Slayer by the time Shota emerged from his torture session. The teacher might have gotten a little carried away. Izuku hadn't allowed the third year to go home since they shared the secret. Tamaki simply wasn't trusted enough by the duo yet. Been watching Demon Slayer? Aizawa tried to make light but always conversation while pulling a blanket over himself, looking over at the teen who was also hurried in about 3 duvets. Tamaki nodded, his pointed ears poking out the top of his dome of blankets. Aizawa clicked the remote. Good choice. My favorite is Fire Force. Have you watched it? Now this conversation was the ultimate test of will. A tired introvert conversing with a tired introvert. Who will fall asleep or ignore the other first? It was like the fucking Hunger Games all over again. No, I haven't. Right, okay, how about Spirited Away? Yes. Nice. Yeah, it's one of my favorites. Same. MHM. Oh dear lord, that was awkward. Anyways, while we leave those two to try and socialize together, let's tap into our favorite ghost who's having fun at his best friend's home. Katsuki, if you don't apologize in 5 seconds, I'm ripping this shit to shreds. Mitsuki held Bakugo's best all might posted by its corner, her fingertips skimming over the paper. Izuku's cackled as he watched. It was like his own cinematic performance. Bakugo panicked, forcing himself to spout a useless apology. Fine, you hag, I'm sorry. Mitsuki's grip loosened a little. Clean the plate up, she demanded, making Katsuki roll his eyes but comply anyways. Okay. He picked up all the pieces and threw them in the bin, much to Izuku's annoyance since he was enjoying watching the chaos unfold. I'll give them a little nudge, then I'll have some more fun, he decided, drifting over to the mother and grabbing her hand momentarily, yanking it down so it forced her to rip the poster right through the middle. Both Mitsuki and Masaru gasped as the 2 sheets of paper fell to the floor. Honey, why'd you do that? He half yelled in panic, desperately picking them up while scurrying to get some tape. Meanwhile, Katsuki was shaking with anger. I didn't do anything, it just slipped, the woman yelled, looking at her hands bewildered. My time to shine, Tilda, come here, Kaken, Izuku sang, possessing the boy's body but allowing him to still be conscious, just unable to control his movements. Mitsuki didn't notice her son's eyes turn a strange green before reverting back to normal. She was simply too engrossed in what just happened to even notice Katsuki approaching her with a knife. No, stop, what am I doing? Katsuki, I swear I didn't. What the fuck are you doing? Put it down, that's not funny. She finally noticed the blade in Katsuki's hands. Strange fear filled her stomach at the sight of his melancholy features. No anger nor sadness could be seen. It was almost like a black hole of emotions, just emptiness. Katsuki spun the blade around in his hands, approaching the lady 1 step at a time. Masaru saw the scene and felt like he was paralyzed. However, he was determined to stop this ordeal at once. Katsuki, stop it. Put that down, it's dangerous, he yelled, running up behind his son and grabbing his wrist. Dad, no, go away. Stop it. The teen swung his arm, the blade impaling Masaru directly in his stomach. Katsuki's face grew a grin as he dragged the blade upwards and cut a gaping gash all the way to his chin. Mitsuki let out a terrified scream, watching hopelessly as the Masaru's skin peeled to the side to show off the still pulsing internal organs hidden away under a bloodied rib cage, body falling like a heap to the floor. Dad. Katsuki, move, what have you done? She wailed, throwing herself on the floor while hugging her husband's head. He was still gasping for air, exposed lungs rising and falling rapidly as he slowly bled out. I didn't do it, I didn't. Aw, he looks so pretty like this. How the heart still beats even after being peeled open amazes me. This wasn't Bakugo's voice. Katsuki bent down next to his mother, pressing the knife tip on the slow beating heart of his father, enjoying seeing his face drain of color. Monster, you aren't son. This is a dream, wake up, wake up. I'll do you a favor, Mitsuki-san, why don't you join your husband? With a swift motion, Katsuki's hand flung upwards, shining silver skimmed over stained flesh. Crunching echoed the house as another lifeless body fell to the floor at the hands of a revenge-seeking immortal. Mum, Dad, oh my God, a young blonde teen sprinted downstairs, just waking up to a horribly vivid dream of something he would rather not remember. Relief flooded his body when he saw them both alive and content sitting at the kitchen table. You're okay, he gasped, trying to steady his pounding heartbeat. It wasn't real. Just a gruesome figment of his imagination. However, as Katsuki's eyes glanced at the floor in relief, a small splatter of fresh blood made his heart stop. Blood that looked all too familiar. Something wasn't quite right. Preparations. Nezu, I thought you just ran away, haha. Present Mike beamed at the sight of the little rodent happily skipping though his office door, nose twitching happily. Hello, care for some tea? Nezu jumped up on Mike's shoulder, holding onto his head for some stability. Mike chuckled. Nezu had been acting strangely lately, but the pro hero was just glad he was back to himself now. No thanks, you got me worried and all when you suddenly disappeared from your office. We were this close to sending out a search party. Mike held out his fingers to gesticulate his statement. All the whole he was yelling cheery hellos to students passing by in the corridors. The rodent waved off his concern. Oh silly, I just went to check on some of our students who have been having a rough time, with all these strange happenings. The voice hero felt a chill go down his spine, a sudden cold sweat dribbling down his forehead. Why yeah, I was thinking about that actually, maybe we should set up some therapy for students. Bakugo. Nezu cut of present Mike mid-sentence, springing off the hero's shoulder and onto Katsuki's shoulder who was walking alone towards the bathroom. Gwa, Bakugo who looked to be in his own fanciful world yelled out and pushed Nezu off him, stumbling over his own feet in the process. Careful kid, you alright Nezu? Mike exclaimed, catching the rodent before he hit the floor. Katsuki looked terrified yet confused at the same time, heavy eye bags lining his blood-red eyes, skin speckled with blemishes and tacky uniform. I'm just fine, it was my fault for making him jump in the first place. Nezu flicked his tail in the air, jumping back onto the floor while looking at Katsuki through black eyes. The poor thing seems very paranoid. Can I help you at all, Bakugo? The blonde quickly dismissed the offer. Just leave me alone. I don't need your help, he panicked and scurried off to the bathroom, a little uneasy about Nezu's strange grin and hollow stare. Ho ho I think he's the one most in need of therapy, the rodent laughed, watching the door swing shut. Mike followed closely behind, laughing awkwardly at the thick atmosphere. Maybe you're right, Nezu. I'm always right. Anyways, do you know where I can find Shota? Nezu stopped outside of class 1A, not seeing the teacher anywhere. All the students were conversing in their own little groups while waiting for him. I'm not sure, maybe in the teacher's lounge. I'll go check for you, Mike beamed while running off before stopping suddenly at the sound of Nezu's voice again. Wait, do you think you could do me another favor while you're at it? Sure, anything you need. I don't have any classes to teach this morning. A smile slipped onto the rodent's face. If you go to my office, there should be a box of small electronic devices, he started to explain. The blonde raised his eyebrow, intrigued by what these so-called devices were for. Take them and place each one around the security gates and surrounding this building, please. It would be a great help. Nezu waved off the teacher, hopping into the classroom while Mike stood there rather confused. However, he chose not to question the principal today. After all, no one wants to get on the Satan rat's bad side. All right, class, listen up. Your teacher isn't feeling well at the moment, so I'll be teaching you. All students looked in bewilderment at the rat, his little nose twitching as he hopped onto the beak so everyone could see him. Being taught personally by our one and only principal, it's an honor. Ida made it his personal task to quiet everyone down, sitting robotically as usual. Sometimes others wondered if the boy really did have a stick up his ass. Nezu giggled, his black eyes glowing as he stared at the class. Those sinister black eyes, they seemed somehow familiar. Now students, I'm sure your teacher will turn up anytime soon. Also, we're expecting a visitor. He's here to teach you a few things. Nezu smiled, a strange cold air filled the room as he did. I've got a bad feeling about this. Something off were the thoughts of many students in the room as they stared at the rodent. He was silent, just staring with a blank look. Ooh, sensei, who's the visitor who's coming to teach us? Uraraka was the first to break the tension, her voice uneasy. Mina looked at everyone with worry, seeing even Bakugo's face drained of color. Ho ho just cute little Tamaki. Nezu's face looked like it glitched when he talked, body suddenly becoming contorted before it merged back again in a second. Only a few noticed, but it was enough to make them fully panic now. I am going to the bathroom, Kaminari yelled out suddenly. The poor boy felt as if his heart was about to thump out of his chest. Denki, Zero yelled as he sprinted to the door, but however much he pulled and yanked at the handle, it only rattled on the hinges and would not open. The electric user looked at the principal in hidden terror. Sit back down, Denki. Why so scared I won't bite? A small giggle escaped his lips. Why'd you lock the door, sensei? Denki's voice trembled. The room fell silent again, quiet enough to hear a hummingbird's whisper. Nezu's tail whipped from side to side. Tamaki should be here any minute. In the meantime, shall we play a game? He purposefully dodged the teen's question. Silence once more. Kaminari, sit down, the principal demanded. However, the blonde was frozen in fear. His feet would not move. Nezu's eyes narrowed before a sudden strong force swept the boy off his feet, pushing his body at speed towards his desk and forcing Denki to sit. Now let's start, he grinned, ignoring the surprised screams which racked the classroom. Shut up, Jesus fucking Christ, I don't know how Aizawa-sensei does this every day. Everyone stared confused at their teacher. His voice had become more high-pitched now, a slight echo ringing on the end of each sentence. Fuck's sakes, this form is really uncomfortable. I hate it. Nezu's face scrunched. However, it was brutally apparent that this wasn't Nezu. Trying to keep all the body parts together is so tiresome. Aizawa-sensei really did a good job at dismembering your principal, hee. Sensei, what are you talking about? Momo shakily questioned, her face pale. Oh, looks like Mike has finished putting up all the quirk suppressants around the school. What a good teacher. A shame he has to die, really. He giggled strangely, looking out the window with glowing eyes. Suddenly there was a knock upon the door. Nezu's ears perked. Tamaki-senpai. Instantly the rodent's body started to float. Again everyone screamed as he emitted a dark green glow before a blur of light left the principal's body. Ag, that's so much better. Izuku appeared above Nezu's lifeless body. To be honest, you couldn't really recognize it at all. His tail lay separated from the body, fur peeling off his face and ribs to show dry bloodied organs and broken bones. What kind of sick joke is this? Katsuki screamed, looking at the glowing body of the boy he murdered many moons ago. Izuku appeared in a gruesome form just for the fun of it. He looked the exact same as that fateful night he was murdered, torn and tattered UA uniform sagging on his bleeding back, deep red holes where his wings were. His face was purple and swollen, black eyes leaking blood to make a horribly vivid image. Come in, Tamaki-senpai. Let's get this party started. Promises. My dear readers, have you ever heard of the saying, it is easier to forgive an enemy than it is to forgive your friend? Well, that quote becomes relevant today at the UA campus. Childhood best friends, who is the first person to come to mind when I say that? Maybe Bakugo and Izuku? Well, yes, but not in this case. Now we're focusing on two different best friends who were practically inseparable since going to school together. Hisashi and Shota. I wonder what these are. Weird. Nezu has some strange ideas, Mike thought to himself with a slight giggle, finishing setting up those weird devices around the school. Time to go back and find Shota. What a slacker, haha. I bet he's asleep in the teacher's lounge. The blonde spoke aloud to himself, quickly remembering that all students were currently working right now, so he should probably be a bit quieter. Mike began to hum to himself while going around the back of the school in order to get to the front door, when a sudden familiar voice stopped him in his tracks. Hisashi. Mike whipped his head around, making eye contact with his tired friend, Shota. I was just looking for you. You know you're missing your class right now. The blonde flashed his usual smile, raising his voice as usual. Aizawa looked the male in his eyes, arms tucked sinisterly behind his back. Drip, drip, drip. Just then, a patch of clouds seemed to float in front of the sun, making the grounds a dark, mellow gray, almost foreshadowing what was to come. Shota, HELLOO Earth to Shota. Mike tried to use his quirk, but for some reason it wouldn't work. At first, the blonde thought this was Aizawa's doing, but he quickly realized otherwise since Aizawa's hair was not floating. "Do you remember when we promised we'd stay together all throughout our life, Hisashi?" Shota questioned monotonously, taking a step closer to the voice hero. Mike started to get worried. "Yeah, of course, but we've got to get you back to your class, Shota." His voice held confusion and hesitance. A shiver traveled down the man's spine, the hair on the back of his neck standing on end as Aizawa's eyes latched onto his skin. "I'm planning on keeping that promise, Hisashi." The hero laughed nervously, a very awkward and suspenseful laugh to say the least. That's good. Now let's get you back to your class, Shota." Mike walked over to his childhood friend, grabbing the man's hand in the intention of dragging him back to the classroom. "Drip, drip, drip. There's no need. Izuku is taking care of them for the time being." Aizawa wouldn't budge if Hisashi tried to pull him. Mike was confused by Aizawa's statement, to say the least. Who was this Izuku, and why did the name feel so familiar? "What are you talking about, Shota? Nezu is looking after your class right now. Stop being weird. What's gotten into you?" The atmosphere seemed to darken. It was a drowning feeling, almost suffocating. Aizawa stood looking down at the floor, his hair messily falling over his shoulders as usual. Something was off. "You don't remember Izuku Midoriya." Mike paled. Was he supposed to remember this person? Why was he so important to Shota? "Drip, drip, drip. Midoriya was right. You are all the same." The teacher lifted his head, finally showing his whole face, and what he saw was horrifying. The edges of Shota's mouth were slighted all the way to his ears, fresh droplets of blood seeping from the surprisingly fresh wound. You could see the blood inside his mouth, once pearly white teeth stained with dark clotted blood and thick saliva dripping on the floor. He looked insane, black eyes alight with a strange lust. "Bloodlust. Shota, what the hell happened to you? Did you get attacked by a villain? Let's get you to recovery, girl, quick." Almost instantly, Mike's worry vanished. In its place, only the kind concern for his friend blossomed. But sometimes kindness can be taken advantage of, sweet naivety corrupted by evil. Hisashi grabbed his friend's arm in a panic. However, almost as soon as he did, the hero felt a scorching pain in his stomach. Like a knife through soft butter, skin was sliced open, releasing that sweet, vibrant liquid of which Aizawa loved so. Mike looked down at the knife in his stomach, Aizawa's own hand wrapped around the hilt of the blade. He looked so happy. Shota had this deranged look which would be impossible for anyone else to imitate. Mike didn't know this man. It was a different person, a stranger. The black-haired teacher cackled at the twisted look on his friend's face, features contorted in agony. But however much physical pain Hisashi could feel, the emotional was 10 times as worse. Shota, Hisashi spluttered, weakness seeping into his body, so much so that he grabbed Aizawa's shoulders to support his body from falling to the floor. The black-haired man still had a smile, the cuts on his face now streaking blood all down his chin and neck. "I won't break out, promise, Hisashi. I'll be with you soon," Aizawa whispered in the pro's ear, dropping him to the ground like a rag afterwards, walking away from the dying man with slight giggles and excited hiccups. "Now that's done, I need to seal off all the exits so Izuku can start." Serpent. Psychopathy. When the cold, logical part of the brain holds the child's self captive in its own house of horrors, and thus a psychopath is born. Indifferent to the self and others, empathy shut off, and only the sick forms of joy afforded by cruelty and vice available for their consumption. Very similar to a snake that represents evil in a human's myths. For these creatures do not require love to raise their young like mammals do, and so they do not evolve the ability to love, only to survive and kill for their own need. Likewise, the psychopath does not feel love. They are an evolutionary throwback to our reptilian brains, an accident of genetics, if you will. You, my reader, may call someone a snake. For example, you may say that your best friend is a snake for snitching on you for vaping in the bathroom, totally not speaking of experience. Fake friends, am I right? Anyways. But that's not the type of snake we're talking about. A psychological snake, someone with the tendency to do whatever in their power to achieve their dreams. And it just so happens that this so-called snake has quite an extravagant plan which he's set on fulfilling. Tamaki-senpai, why you're so funny? Now can you stop with this joke because it's getting out of hand, Jiro yelled amidst the silent whispers of confusion and fear. The third year who had been unwillingly dragged into this situation began to shake, his eyes alert with fear while holding a sort of control with a button in his hand. Izuku hovered over him, placing his weightless hand on Tamaki's shoulder in a supportive manner. Students of Class 1A, if you still think this is a joke, please take a look out of the window. Izuku watched everyone rush to the side. However, amidst the panic, one person remained seated, his face pale and unmoving, crimson eyes shaking with rage and worry. Deku, he muttered underneath his breath. Katsuki hadn't slept in a week, terrified of these reoccurring dreams that plagued him as he slept. The young teen even thought he was crazy because of what happened with his parents. But now it all made sense. The nightmares, hallucinations, everything, it was all Izuku's fault, and Katsuki absolutely fucking despised him. It seemed killing him once simply wasn't enough. Screams snapped Katsuki out of his daze, his class banging on the window's glass while crying a waterfall of tears. Aizawa stood outside with a knife in hand, his face carved into a smile as Mike lay dead at his feet, an ever-growing pool of crimson growing underneath him. The sight was something else. To see their teacher of whom they trusted for such a long time commuting something so unjust and horrific, it was hard to believe. Hell erupted quite literally. Screams and the sounds of sobs, they tried to bang on the glass to break it with their quirks. Anything but their quirks would not work for some reason. The only thing that could so was stare into Shota's black eyes wild with excitement of what he had just done, his tongue streaking along the knife as if it were some sort of delicious treat. Suddenly silence fell upon the students. It's not like they willingly went silent, obviously, something was preventing them from speaking. In a second, Aizawa vanished and so did the shadowy ghost of Izuku, leaving only Tamaki stood there in the silence, the remote control still embedded in his hand. Students clawed crazily at their faces, jaws open to the brim in an attempt to let out even a small squeak of a voice, but nothing happened. Tamaki let out a slow, controlled breath and attempted to loosen his body movements. He looked like a clockwork soldier and he was certain this wouldn't impress Izuku, so he gave his shoulders a wiggle and lolled his head in a circle, letting his mind slacken to a more relaxed state. I'm sorry to do this, but it's really out of my hands now, and I think Midoriya-kun deserves justice for what everyone did to him. Tamaki watched everyone panic for what he was going to say next, Kirishima trying to desperately pry the door open while silently screaming. It was so quiet you could even hear young Tamaki's deep breaths of comfort. Midoriya is a nice person. I don't know why anyone would want to do what you did. I apologize. With that, his finger smashed down on the button. Haunting laughter racked the school as every part of the building was encased in solid quirk, reflecting iron boarding up every available window and door. Darkness encased the classroom, lights flickering in sync with the high-pitched giggles. Every phone in sight smashed randomly, leaving glass scattering everywhere as people ran to huddle in a protective circle, preserving what they learnt in hero training. Any sort of communication was lost, voice and text. In darkness and silence, what will each class do? This was the first test Izuku had assigned, who really was willing to break under the enormous pressure as become violent to their so-called friends. Who were the serpents under the rock? Meanwhile, three people once heroes, now converted to villainy, happily sat in a ramen restaurant. That looks like it hurt Shota. Haha, I know I told you to scare them, but wow. Izuku's laughed delightfully, his voice and body unseeable to any other costumers but the other two at the table. Tamaki smiled. He felt like he had just cleared a major hurdle in his life. Aizawa shrugged his shoulders, seemingly back to his old bored self. It felt like a good idea in the moment, he mumbled, letting his hair shield the fresh scabs on his face. Izuku sighed, placing a transparent finger on the teacher's face and healing the scab in a couple seconds. Tadea, I'm not all death and destruction, I can be your guardian angel, he giggled, voice slightly echoey. Aizawa took a swig of his coffee, more like guardian devil, but I don't think some other people would class you as a guardian Izu. The ghost gushed at his new nickname Aizawa had given him, but you guys are my favorites, so I'll always be here for, he sang, floating out of happiness, bouncy green hair swishing with his movements. Tamaki giggled, slurping his ramen with his soft purple hair tied in a ponytail, your funny Midoriya. Call me Izuku, he hummed sweetly, pushing Aizawa's food closer to him to make sure he was eating. Tamaki nodded sheepishly, his pointed ears turning a little pink at the ends. How do you think the class will do? He piped up a little, scanning both Shota and Izuku's faces with shy eyes. They'll be absolutely fine, but I really am looking forward to doing that thing you came up with, Shota. Once I've made a few more preparations, I'll let you have as much fun as you want, sensei, he replied, looking slightly enviously at the two's food. Tamaki noticed this. Izuku, can you not eat? The third year decided to not question what Izuku and Aizawa had in plan for the school. PFT, Tamaki-senpai, I'm a ghost. Did you forget that I'm dead already? Tamaki nodded nervously, finishing his off by drinking the leftover broth. Finished? Shota questioned, placing his empty coffee mug down. Why, yes, thank you for the food. Aizawa waved him off. It's whatever, I'm not paying for it anyways. He stood up to leave, making the poor young boy confused. I have some money. No, just a little explosion will do the trick. Izuku intercepted their conversation, tapping a small explosive to the window, a countdown of 15 seconds starting already. Aizawa sighed. Do you really have to blow this place up? He deadpanned, pushing the frozen stiff Tamaki out of the doorway so they could get away from the shop. Izuku floated in front of them, his face plastered in delight. Well, Shota, would you rather unicorns and rainbows or something? Don't be boring. You know what, I wouldn't mind unicorns. Well, I can probably fetch you one from the underworld, sensei. Untrustworthy. Ring around the rosy. A pocket full of posies. Ashes, we all burn down. Echoey singing filled the desolate UA halls. From each classroom in the school yelling could be heard, however their shouts for help stayed mufflers due to the steel boarding every entrance. The halls were dark, however a dull, sinister green glow illuminated the dark walls as our favorite ghost skipped down the corridors. Ring around the rosy. Who do you suppose we? Kill first, Tilda. Izuku swished his transparent fingers through the thin air, his iconic red shoes perched scruffily on his feet as he glided across the smooth floor. His hair was matted with dry blood and soot, face splotched in old green and purple bruises. Today he took on his middle school self, his small leather wings folded comfortably behind his back with a scrubby yellow backpack in hand. Hee, Izuku-kun, how do you think Kaken is doing? The ghost strangely talked to himself, holding his hand up to his face to pretend it was talking back. Izuku opened his hand while mumbling a resource as if it was someone else. I think he is missing us. We should spend some time with him today, he spoke while opening his hand to match the words. Izuku's eyes brightened as if his friend had given him an amazing suggestion. You're right, Izuku-kun. I'm sure Kaken really wants to see me, but I'm going to visit Class 1B first. He grinned madly, black eyes widening with excitement as he quickly floated to the door of Class 1B and phased through the steel door. Inside, he saw that the class had moved all the desks to the corners of the room, and in the middle they sat in a strategic circle, each one facing different parts of the room to watch out for any movement. Izuku wasn't visible right now, so he decided to take the chance to listen to what they were talking about in the darkness. So everyone's phone smashed, right? Kendo asked out of the blue, breaking their continuous silence. Many nodded, sending an affirmative hum instead of answering. So we've got no way to tell the time or contact the outside, just what is going on, maybe a villain, she wondered aloud, making Monoma sigh and stand up suddenly. Stop fucking talking, I'm trying to think, you idiot. Kendo looked at the dark outline of the blonde boy in utter surprise. Other students gasped also. Hey, what's your problem? Pony huffed, turning her head with a pout. Monoma let out a loud sigh, failing to notice the faint giggles coming from the corner of the room. What's my problem? Oh, let me see. Maybe because we've been fucking stuck in this dark-ass classroom for almost a day without food or water, not to mention we can't even use our bloody quirks for some reason. He went on a rampage, scaring the rest of the class because of how he was acting. Monoma had never shown this side to himself before. Kendo thought it was a good idea to calm him down before he got too riled up. Look, I'm sure we'll be out of here soon. The pros are most likely on their way to find us right now. Bullshit. The blonde started to feel a strange pressure on his chest, his vision becoming spiny and disoriented for a second, making him lose his balance and fall to the floor in disarray. Monoma rubbed his eyes violently with his hands, taking gasping breaths as Kendo ran up to her friend in alarm and attempted to console him. Hey Monoma, listen to me, you're going to be fine, just breathe. He wasn't fine. That was very much an empty promise. She's lying. Monoma yelled and slapped her hand away suddenly, his head frantically searching the dark room. Who was that? Who said that? Gee guys, there's someone in here. Dude, chill, no one said anything. Stop freaking out, you're making us all worried, Tetsu interjected, his arm outstretched in a protective motion for two other students who were behind him. However, it looked as if the blonde boy couldn't hear them at all as he continued to shuffle along the floor till his back hit the wall. Don't trust anyone, they aren't your friends, they want you dead. Voices, fuck off. He started to flail his hand in the air erratically, swinging his fists at some sort of imaginary conjuring of his mind. I think he's gone crazy, Shiozaki whispered to her brown-haired friend, trying to make sense of Monoma's movements through the darkness. Komari shakily agreed with her, moving away from Monoma out of fear. Kill them before they kill you first, you're all on your own. The room reeked of terror. Even when Monoma started to blindly smash his head against the wall while wailing in distress, no one came near him. They simply waited for him to knock himself out. At least he's not shouting anymore. Yeah, I never knew he was someone to get so nervous. Same, but he should be fine, right? Who cares, he'll wake up in a few hours or something. True. And they call themselves friends, fucking pathetic. Oh well, I'm done with them for now, let's go see Kakin. Izuku continued to curse the class in his head till he arrived at class 1A. Swinging his head in a circle, Izuku took a deep breath and prepared what he had in store first. Drifting through the steel door, Izuku could smell the grotesque fragrance of Nezu's rotting body parts still on the floor when he possessed him the other day. It looked like the students hadn't dared touch the principal at all. Even Izuku couldn't help but cringe at the maggots which feasted on the dry hollow organs and exposed bone, flies buzzing around the whole room to make a gross orchestra of humming noises. Bleh, I hate this classroom, Midoriya thought to himself, laying eyes on the students of 1A much similar to Class B. They were all sat in a circle except facing each other in a heated discussion. Do you idiots really not remember? Katsuki half-shouted, sat next to Kirishima on his right and Momo on his left. Sierra was sweating as he remembered his experience from both the festival and the night of Izuku's murder. Course we do, Bakugo, we're not dumb, it's just hard to believe, Uraraka yelled, annoyed at the blonde, Tsu trying to uselessly calm her. That was fucking Deku alright, he was fucking alive, he yelled louder now, face twisted in rage and resentment. He wasn't alive, bro, Kaminari shakily added, his head downturned for the floor. What does he want with me? I never did anything to hurt him, Achako bawled, fake tears, playing the classic victim card. This statement made Izuku physically twitch in disgust, resisting the urge to simply crack her head open like a coconut and prepare her brain as a healthy smoothie for Shota. Silence overcame the classroom once more before Shoji broke the tension. What do you think he wants? Us. Drew colors. Momo, make us some more water, Hagakure complained, sat next to Gyro while bored as fuck. The class had been using the poor girl for all their needs for almost a day now. She was getting utterly exhausted. Momo felt as if she was just a tool for their own survival, only meant to live for their needs. It was greatly pissing her off, but she would not show it, instead showing a kind smile and complying to what they said. Oh, of course, she whispered meekly into the darkness, using whatever was left of her fat stores to make a couple bottles of water. It didn't take long till she was utterly stick-thin and unnaturally pale, most likely on the verge of passing out. Tusk, 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 what fake friends? The long-haired girl gasped loudly at the voice which rattled in her mind. The echo felt weird, like a worm which was nagging in the back of her brain and poking her skull in testament, seeing how long she could go till giving into this figment of imagination. No one paid any mind to the girl who now looked strangely panicked. After all, she was only good for one thing, resources, until they could get out of here. Bakugo was busy checking every nook and cranny of the iron barricade around the room, looking for any potential weak points. After all, Katsuki had to distract himself from the recent collection of events, and he could not simply blow the place up because everyone's quirks were out of use. Found anything, Bakugos? Kirishima asked, watching his blonde friend in anticipation. A low growl came from the teen's throat, his brows knitted together in anger as he harshly slammed his fist against the metal. No, every fucking corner is reinforced with welded bolts, it's practically impossible to open. Kirishima nervously laughed. So we're still stuck, he mumbled to himself, trying to test out his quirk, but again it was no use. The air was sticky, it was claustrophobic and thin, parching those who inhabited the room of fresh, life-giving air. No one wanted to admit it, but they were deeply scared and confused. Silence overcame the solemn classroom, like a thick overhanging cloud of dust set above their still heads. In the darkness, a weak whisper from a parched and broken throat comes to life. The sound is beautiful yet tantalizing, his chords broken in a pretty fashion. Class 1A. Fear overcame the inhabitants. It felt as if each person had swallowed a stone and it was weighing deep in their guts, stomach swirling in uncomfortable leaps and bounds. It's him again, Mina whispered, springing on her feet and urging others to do the same. Have you missed me? I've been looking so forward to spending time with everyone again. The ghost finally decided to show himself, still taking on the form of his middle school self, all torn and tattered. The students couldn't do anything but try a protective stance. After all, the hero course never said anything about fighting fucking ghosts. Izuku smiled and drifted over to Katsuki, the only person who remained on the floor. The boy felt as if an invisible paralysis overcame his body, gripping him from his very core to make sure he didn't move. Oh, why do you all look so terrified? It's just like the old days, no? Spending time together as a class. His face split into a wide smile, gums and chipped teeth on show. He leant down to violently grab Bakugo's jaw, cold, unloving fingers making him uncomfortably squirm. Fuck you, Deku, Katsuki spat, a string of saliva leaving his lips. The one in question tutted his head, transparent skin crinkling around the sides as a sickly idea came to mind, black eyes tinted with a supple shine. Let's play Kakin, your friends can participate as well. He let go of the blonde's face finally, leaving red blotchy marks in his smooth skin. Izuku's floated around the boy, his hand gently gliding over each of his limbs. I'll slowly tear you apart, and once you're on the devil's door, I'll piece you back together and we can start all over again. You all can watch, let's see how much you can take, he screamed, a toxic green glow of a shockwave leaving Izuku's body and throwing each person off their feet and back onto the floor. Stop please, we're sorry. Uraraka yelled as she watched Bakugo's body jerk into the air and strung up in a wide star position in front of everyone, his arms and legs bound by what it seemed like black voids of negative energy. Izuku only laughed louder at the uproar of protest, sending out more hordes of synthetic energy to keep the students tethered to the ground, heads held in position towards Katsuki so they couldn't cower and cover their eyes to witness what was to come. Now that you lot are quiet, I can have the real fun. The ghost lunged towards the bound blonde, his hand wrapping around Katsuki's palm, eyes alight with sadistic pleasure. 1. Fuck you, Deku, don't you dare! Katsuki choked on his breath, from his chest erupting an agonized scream, as his finger was forced against the back of his hand with an awful crack. 2. Flaring white-hot pain exploded through Katsuki's hand and upwards, another finger contorted in an unnatural position. 3. Stop it, stop. Bakugo's body jerked and thrashed around in the bonds, unintended screams leaving his hoarse throat continuously. 4. His nerves were on fire, splintered bone penetrating through Katsuki's bleeding hand as ligaments send electric flight impulses all around his body. The ghost was ecstatic, the pleasure of seeing his ex-tormentor in so much pain leaving Izuku a giggling mess. Finally wrapping his hand around the blonde's thumb, he bent the digit sideways with a final crack. 5. Bakugo's hand flopped aimlessly around, as Izuku dropped the contorted limb as if it were a doll which a child had lost interest in. "Aw, you poor thing, that must hurt." Izuku smiled while looking at Katsuki's hand, odd pieces of bone sticking out of bruised and purple swollen skin, thick blood dripping to the floor from his twisted fingertips. Shallow, ragged, and parched breaths left the boy's painfully chapped lips, nostrils flaring to try and intake more of the stuffy air which resonated the room. The blonde took a deep breath, his eyes narrowed in a glare to make eye contact with Izuku. "Bring it on, asshole. I'm looking forward to what your pathetic ass has in store," he hissed, chest heaving as a cocky smirk crossed his pale face. Izuku scoffed. "You better not go back on your words, Kaken," he growled, plunging his finger into Katsuki's eye. In an instant his smirk disappeared, his mouth wide open with silent screams as his throat closed from the pain. Everyone cringed in disgust, too afraid to say something in fear of the same pain being inflicted upon themselves. A gruesome pop followed by a squelch echoed as Izuku's finger dug deeper into the squishy flesh, blood pouring from the socket and dripping in great amounts down Bakugo's face and onto the floor. Katsuki cried out. It felt like Izuku's cold finger was digging into his pulsating brain and pressing against his skull. "Oh, I've washed that annoying smirk of your face at least. Do you really think this was painful? I feel sorry for you, Kaken," he cackled, hooking the tip of his finger behind his ex-friend's eye and pulling it out with another pop. A deep void of dark, blotchy blood pulled his eye socket. Now all that was attaching the eye and its original place was a lengthy optic nerve which was strained as Izuku pulled the eyeball further away. "GGWHH, fuck," he cried, every part of his body screaming as Izuku wrapped his finger around the optic nerve and yanked it with a horrific snap. Izuku gushed. "You look pretty like this, Kaken," he mused, throwing the bleeding eye into the scared, silent crowd of watching students, earning muffled screams and silent shrieks. I'll let you keep the other eye," he smiled, tapping his bloodied green fingers down Katsuki's shaking face, finally grabbing his shoulder and placing his other hand on his back. "A massage, Kaken," he teased, cracking his shoulder back with a firm snap, ignoring Katsuki's screams to put tension in the limb as he started to rip and pull the broken arm away from his body. His skin acted like fabric, ripping and tearing in strings of muscles as the bones separated from his shoulder blade. The blonde's mind became foggy with blood loss, explosive hot pain shooting through his whole body more violently now, his face caked with flaky, dry blood, eyelid closing over his gruesomely empty socket. A final snap. Izuku's floated in front of everyone now, holding the bloodied limp arm with a strange enjoyment. My mama used to tell me there was no such thing as monsters. She was wrong. Hellish. I need a coffee. Tamaki nodded his head in agreement, laying down on the front of the UA steps in boredom. Shall we go see how Izuku is doing? The third year piped up, blue hair messily falling around his eyes as he looked at the tired teacher leaning on the steel-boarded door. And how do you suppose we get through this, Tamaki? Aizawa asked, dumbfounded, knocking his fist on the steel. The teen went completely red from embarrassment, hanging his head in between his knees. I forgot about that, he mumbled. Aizawa sighed and walked over to the boy, ruffling his hair with a firm hand. Don't worry about it. Wanna get something to eat? I'm guessing Izuku will be a while, he offered, making Tamaki look up at him with a small sparkle in his eyes. All right, let's. Excuse me, a sudden high-pitched voice interrupted, followed by persistent banging at the UA gates. Shota crooked his head to the center of the voice, seeing a short woman with her hair cut into a short bob, her face contracting rather dark eye bags and blemishes. What most stood out to Shota, however, was her bright green hair, almost reminding him of Izuku's hair. As he walked closer to the gate, freckles became prominent on the lady's bony face, almost completely convincing Shota that she was related to the dead boy somehow. Aizawa looked at her through the gates on the other side. Can I help you, ma'am? He asked with his eyes narrowed, Tamaki walking and hiding behind Shota's back. May I ask why the school is closed? She wondered with a little tremor in her voice. Shota thought about his answer for a moment. Him and Tamaki had been told by Izuku to look out for any people who could potentially alert the authorities or pro-heroes about the school being locked down. They had to be cautious. What's your name? Inko Midoriya. My son Izuku used to go here. She paused for a second, studying Aizawa's expression. He was surprised but wouldn't show it on the outside, instead covering his curiosity with a stone-like face. Tamaki, who was still hiding behind him, let out a little gasp at the name. UA has been temporarily closed for inspections. Sorry, Shota stated, now softer. He couldn't imagine what the mother was going through. Even he as a teacher felt heartbroken at Izuku's predicament. Shota couldn't even begin to empathize with what Inko felt. Hidden sadness fell around Inko's darkened eyes, short bangs covering the slight muscles her shoulders held. Okay, but at least tell me your name. I need to speak to the principal, she practically begged now, hands clasped together appealingly. The teacher sighed. Shota Aizawa, he admitted, knowing what was about to come. The name rang a familiar bell within Inko's mind, her mind flashing through previous memories in order to link the name to her thoughts. Mama, I'm home. An excited teen bounced through his door, soft leather wings behind his back flapping a little in happiness, his dark nose twitching with the scent of his favorite food. Izu baby, tell me how your first day was, his mother sang just as excited as him, waddling over to Izuku and embracing him in her arms. The boy pranced into the kitchen, following his nose earnestly to see his mother's home-made katsudon freshly steaming on a plate, the aromatic smell scenting the whole house. Thanks, Mama. Oh, today was so exciting. I meet my teacher and guess what? He happily sat by the kitchen table and picked up some chopsticks, soon joined by Inko on the other side, smiling as he ate. What is it? She asked with a giggle at her son's innocent joy. The underground hero Eraserhead is my teacher. Mr. Aizawa is so cool. You were my son's homeroom teacher. Please, I need to talk to you, she begged, hands clasped tightly together again as she looked at the teacher with hopeful eyes. Aizawa was about to turn her away when the faint echoes of terrorized screams rattled their way out of the boarded-up school. Not wanting their cover to be blown, Shota quickly agreed and began to lead her away before she heard anything, leaving Tamaki in charge of lookout. Have you had enough yet, Kaken? Izuku whispered into his ear, finishing the same delimbing process for around 2 hours. Each time he didn't have any more arms nor legs, Izuku would piece him back together and start again. Occasionally, he would throw Bakugo's mutilated arms into the crowd of paralyzed onlookers, It was funner that way to hear all their screams harmonized like the devil's own choir of tortured souls. The air smelt metallically of blood, sweat, and tears. Crimson caked the float boards around Katsuki's still suspended figure, mouth agape as his head hung low to the ground. He didn't have either the physical nor mental capacity to even breathe out the quietest of whimpers. Izuku smiled at his silence. Finally shutting that arrogant, blabbering mouth of his seemed to be more satisfying than imagined. "He's not dead, right?" Uraraka whispered. Tetsu sat next to her, the girl's voice holding an audible tremble, words fragmented and hard to understand. Izuku overheard her and even wondered the same thing himself, so he placed a finger under Katsuki's chin and lifted his head. The teen's face was drenched in sweat and tear tracks, spiked blonde hair sticking to his forehead, deep breaths of hot air falling from his lips. Izuku sighed. How weak. He passed out, the ghost taunted with an eye roll, releasing his bounds of black energy on the boy to let him fall in a heap to the floor, like a piece of unwanted clothing destined for disposal. Everyone was silent, not daring to even glance once at the murderous spirit before them. "Oh, so sorry for not giving any of you as much fun as Kaken." Izuku floated down to crouch next to Kaminari, who was frozen like a block of stone, his chest heaving erratically with panicked breaths, nostrils flaring to get as much air in the stuffy room. "Oh, Kami, why didn't you film this on your phone? You seem to quite enjoy playing paparazzi," Izuku asked with a head tilt, referring to how the boy filmed his murder and sent it around the whole school. The electric-haired boy avoided eye contact at all costs, no matter how close Izuku got, skin layered in a cold blanket of nervous sweat. Izuku raised his eyebrow, jaw going slack. "Answer me," he suddenly shouted, making everyone in the room almost jump out of their skin. Kaminari, on the other hand, shook like a leaf in a strong storm at the outburst. I'm sorry. Izuku." The ghost slapped his hand around the boy's throat mid-sentence, throwing his back against the wall in a second. "Don't you dare call me by my first name," he spat, disgusted, drifting over to Denki, who was now coughing from the impact. "Midoriya-san, I'm sore." "Why?" he spluttered, words broken apart messily as he struggled for breath. Izuku lolled his head in a circle, cracking it in the most unnatural positions before looking at Denki intently. "Seeing as you enjoy broadcasting torture so much, I'll do it for you this time. After all, I'm only helping you out, right? Because we're friends, yes?" Izuku cackled, grabbing Kaminari's face in his transparent hand while laughing. His cackles shook everyone to their core. Something deep inside his voice was like an unknown beast, ready to break free from the bounds of which it was captured in. Izuku whipped out a camera, twirling it in his fingers mockingly. "I'll broadcast this on live television all around Tokyo. I'll show the civilians just how heroic you all are." He stood in front of the class like an extravagant display, floating atop Katsuki's unconscious body in a derogative manner, a status of power and neglect. "No, stop." Izuku raised his hands, palms up towards the ceiling, as a cloud of dark matter surrounded the whole classroom, engulfing the screaming teens. However, their yells were short-lived, leaving only the deflated sounds of bodies hitting the floor as they all fell into a forced slumber. "Welcome Class 1A to the place of your nightmares. Nothing is real. Imagination. Dissociation. Paralysis. Sleep. Unconsciousness. Euphoria. All the same, really." The mind converted to a thick, foggy state, all sense of reality blurred right before one's eyes. Zero woke up in his classroom. The sun shone brightly through the large windows overlooking the UA campus, bustling with students joyfully prancing in between their own friend groups. His whole class looked delirious, just like him, rubbing the sleep away from their eyes and peering around the warm classroom a little stunned. All of them had the exact same thought. A dream. Little did they know it was far from that. The first person to clear their mind of this horribly lucid dream was Mina. She gasped and stretched loudly. "Wow, I must have fallen asleep there." She strained her neck around to look at the clock above Aizawa's whiteboard. 666. The clock read. Rubbing her eyes, Mina looked at her phone instead. It must be broken, she concluded before reading her many piled-up notifications. By now everyone had started to quietly chat about their next lessons, when Aizawa would turn up and so on, just normal stuff. Each and every person refused to speak a word of their dream, simply pretending that everything was blissfully back to the way it was before. Let's go to lunch, shitty hair, or else that dumb class B will take all the good food, Katsuki growled, grabbing his stunned friend by his collar and stomping out the classroom. The boy's mind was going haywire. Pain, torture, death. It was all so real. Shaking his head violently, Katsuki sighed as the rest of the Baka squad followed him out the door like annoying baby ducklings. They claimed themselves to be his friends, but in reality he only deemed them as persistent flies. Oh, it's Class 1A again. Monoma in all his glory shoved his way into the canteen, followed by an angry Kendo. Katsuki ignored his presence, taking a place in the line for food. Dude, what's your problem with us? Sounds like your mother never loved you. Kaminari made a snarky comeback, causing Shiro and Mina either side of him to laugh hysterically. As the two groups continued bickering, Bakugo was observing. Something just seemed off. Though he couldn't put his finger on it, the bright sun's rays shimmering through the large windows just felt fake. It was too perfect. The calm before a storm. Will you lot shut up? Shota walked groggily into the loud canteen, his usual dark eye bags and annoyed mask covering his stubbled features. Sorry, sensei, Kendo forced Monoma to bow apologetically, shamefully scuttling away with the blonde boy in a headlock. Katsuki ignored the teacher's presence and continued to look. He noticed some random students whom he never even glanced twice at. Their faces, they were blurred, like someone had applied a smear of paint across each person's features, movements looking almost too smooth and airy. Rather disturbed by these faceless beings, Bakugo ripped his eyes away from the crowd and to his hands, staring at his hands intently, eyes going blurry as he struggled to focus on what he could make out to be his palms. The very tips of his fingers were slightly transparent, showing the top of his shoes and dusty floor underneath. Aizawa turned to the students with a look of boredom, glancing once at Katsuki, who was silently shaking before opening his parched mouth. Don't make him angry, he croaked out, throat sounding dry and rustic. The group looked at him with a collective eyebrow arch. What? Don't scream, Shota told them again, his face painfully still compared to these seemingly important sentences. Shiro began to nervously laugh, trying to shake off his behavior as a joke. Do not look away. Katsuki slowly crooked his neck to side glance at Shota, his mind piecing together the mental pieces of this strange puzzle. Run, Aizawa finished, his head swinging all the way around with an orchestra of different sounds of cracking bones and clicks, almost owl-like. Mina did exactly what she was told not to at the horrific sight. Alien face, don't! She screamed. Instantly the canteen fell terrifyingly quiet, the previous sunlight pouring from the windows replaced with the ill, milky glow of the moon. Every person in the hall froze, their backs facing the shunned group, every person's arm outstretched high in the air with a pointer finger directed to the roof. Bodies as still as stone, not a single movement. Their eyes followed the statue-like people's hands, leading to a swinging body attached to the roof. The body was strung by the neck, a tight noose possibly being the root of its death. The person's limbs swayed rhythmically with the howl of gusts blowing through the canteen. Mina stifled another scream. Do not take your eyes off that thing, Katsuki whispered, eyes locked on the swaying body. Kaminari resisted the urge to run away, taking on Bakugo's advice. Remember what sensei said, do not look away, he quoted the teacher's words, slowly shuffling to the exit, still with his gaze superglued to the corpse. The body started to turn slowly in the noose, revealing its mangled face to the terrified teens. Amazing gouts of thick black liquid fell from its lips, mangled green hair laying clotted against his hollowed cheeks and lax jaw. Deku. The rest of the class followed Katsuki's movements. It was hard to not look away from the gruesome sight. Many felt the need to simply douse their eyes in bleach and scrub them raw with a wire brush. Uraraka's lower lip trembled as she clutched firmly onto the back of Iida's jacket while sidestepping with the others towards the door. While doing so, her foot snagged a person's who was frozen, ultimately leading to her ruining the whole fucking thing for everyone else and looking away as she stumbled to the ground. Damn Uraraka! She gasped at the annoyed shouts. However, there wasn't much time to victim blame, for every person in the hall who was pointing at the body before now faced them directly. Just like Katsuki saw before, their faces were gone, almost like a thin layer of skin had been stretched across their skulls, concave dents where the eyes and mouth should be. Round face, you idiot, you only had to do one thing and you fucked it up, Katsuki bellowed, annoyed as he did so. Ochako simply disappeared also. Stunned, the boy zipped his mouth shut and scoured the area for any signs of her. Bakugo, we need to get out of here. Hurry up. Just leave her, it doesn't matter. Giving into the defeat and terror of the surrounding faceless beings, Katsuki reluctantly turned his head away and ran to follow the already miles ahead class. Just one more glance. He stopped. Right in the ridge of the doorway, the blonde turned around to look at the room one last time. Slowly, oh so very slowly, the hanging body turned around. It looked different. Limbs only slightly shorter, previous matted green hair now a distinguished brown, cut perfectly into a short bob. Watery moonlight danced on her pale, plump cheeks, skirt rippling with every swaying movement, neck painted prettily in dark blotches of purple, black, and blue, dark eyes glazed over with the fog of death, mouth hanging open as if still trying to intake some oxygen. A voice rang through his head. I am the shape you made me, filth teaches filth. God's fallen angel. My readers, for today's chapter we are traveling back in time. We rewind the story all the way back to the fateful and horrific night of Izuku Midoriya's murder. However, this time we shift to the perspective to our ghost protagonist, following him through his journey into the afterlife and right back into the realm of the living. Izuku had just been killed. Beaten into heaven by Katsuki's demand, the green teen had always been a kind and loving person, forgiving people almost as soon as they bullied him. Simply an angel put on earth, mistreated and belittled, for his wings were not white and featured. Maybe that was why no one ever realized his invisible halo, the clear favor God showered upon the boy. No one saw it because the portal to heaven through his eyes was covered with a deep black that colored his pupils. Izuku looked down at his deceased body. He felt numb while looking at it, gouts of blood seeping from the deep hole in his back, swollen face laying dirtied on the ground, hardly recognizable. People walked past the dark alleyway. They only looked. They did nothing. Civilians averting their gaze almost as soon as laying sight on the murder scene. The boy felt betrayed, clear tears floating out of his soulless eyes while watching the aftermath. Izuku looked down at his hands through tears, strangely transparent fingers trembling. That was then when Izuku realized he was dead. Mama, he worried, the first thought crossing his mind. But there was no time for such thoughts because the dead teen felt a strange light shower him. It was so incredibly calming, as if his soul had been wrapped in the lightest of festered duvets. Sadness evaporated, worry vanished. So nice was all his thoughts as Izuku calmly closed his eyes, accepting death with open arms. He felt no need for revenge, simply forgiveness. As expected from God's favorite. The next thing registered in Izuku's mind was the feeling of his head laying gently on someone's lap. He felt at peace. Izuku never wanted to wake up, just stay like this forever, for eternity. You truly are my most perfect creation, child. Otherworldly and majestic. Those were one way to describe the voice, echoed and comfortable. Izuku felt his mind clear like the blue skies of a cool summer day, forcing his eyes to methodically flutter open. He didn't see a person. A higher being, impossible to describe or even comprehend in the human eye. My dear angel, you have been wronged on Earth in too many ways than one. Izuku listened to this being, eyes shone with the sparkle of the cosmos' stars. His body felt weightless and weirdly bubbly, devoid of the previous sadness that consumed him. The boy thought deeply about his next words. It's okay. They have their reasons. Izuku forced a smile to cross his unblemished face. I've taught you to never crave vengeance, but my angel, I will grant you flexibility. A cloud of confusion fogged Izuku's pure mind. He wanted to look at this being in front of him, but it was impossible to even create a mental image of him. Go back to the mortal world, seek revenge, and send all who have wronged you to hell. Damn them for eternity, for killing my creation. Izuku was confused. He didn't understand the concept of revenge and anger which drove a person to harm another. He had never felt such a thing and couldn't imagine himself doing so anytime soon. But Lord, I cannot feel such strong emotions. They take no place in my heart, he answered back, not keen on the idea. Subject them to torture worse than death, child. That is all I wish of you. Izuku had no place to refuse his lord, however he simply could not complete this task. Impossible. May I learn how to first? He complied, bright light shining all around him. You may learn from the ruler of hell. Only once thou hast completed this mission will I allow you to return by my side. This isn't fucking real, it's all made up. Well, it feels pretty damn real to me, Katsuki, Kirishima screamed back, punching the blonde in the shoulder as an example. Bakugo recoiled and hissed in pain. See. Currently the class was all split up, hiding in different empty classrooms of their school, hiding from him. Katsuki had not told anyone about what he saw before running from the canteen. The disturbing image of Achako's body strung up on a noose making his nose scrunch in disgust. She was annoying anyways. How the fuck do you explain this then? Katsuki yelled back, wanting to jump out of his hiding spot underneath the desk in the teacher's lounge where they took refuge in. Kirishima shook his head, memories flashing through his mind. I don't know, bro, he mumbled, curling further into his hiding spot. Then let's. SHHH, the reed-headed teen hissed sharply, pointing silently to the door leading to the dark, desolate hallway. First he didn't hear anything, but the awful sound of wet feet sloppily tapping down the hallway was quick to catch Katsuki's ear. They watched the small gap between the door and floor, what looked like bloody footprints slowly making their way up and down the hallway and repeat. Up and down and repeat. Katsuki could feel his head grow light from limiting his breath in the fear of making a sound, paranoia eating away at his brain. He didn't know. He couldn't go through that torture again. Katsuki would willingly slit his throat before enduring that again. In fact, Bakugo even was considering it right now. One slice of the blade could end this ordeal. He could rest. Oh, how he wished to just sleep. A sleep without reoccurring nightmares. That would truly be heaven. Suddenly the footsteps neared their door again. They expected them to walk past like the few times before, but this time they stopped. Small crimson footprints bloodied the floor as the door slowly swung ajar with a tense creak, the drowsy light from the hallway spilling into the quiet room. Kirishima and Bakugo held their breath, however the boys thought that the mere sound of their hearts pounding against their rib cage was loud enough. The duo didn't know how the footprints were being made. There was no physical body attached to them, but you would guess that by now they would have been used to weird shit like that. I know you're in here, Kakin. The blonde could feel his throat close up, heart sinking down to his gut as the bloody footprints slapped against the floor as he walked around the dark room. I just want to spend some time with my best friend Kakin Tilda. Best friend? Kirishima wondered. He only ever saw Katsuki bullying Izuku. Never were they friends. Katsuki gritted his teeth. He couldn't fight back against a fucking dead person, and he couldn't run. What to do? Frozen scared, there was only one option left. I know you're in here, Tilda. Bakugo swallowed. He was at a crossroad. A child's violent will to survive lodged in his chest in place of his heart, but an utter indifference along with it. The blonde was about to follow out with his plan when a sudden shriek set his body in stone. Found you! Kirishima screamed aloud as cold, clammy hands clasped around his shoulders tightly, hauling the teen out of his hiding place. The boy flailed like a rabbit caught in a fox's jaws, face caked in terrified sweat, mouth wide and begging for forgiveness. Bakugo, help, help, he'll kill me, Kirishima pleaded. Katsuki ignored his so-called friend. Better him than me. Hope drained from Kiri's body, staring directly into depleted, ghastly eyes that appeared before his very face, so cold and desolate of forgiveness and life. For a moment, Kirishima thought he could catch a glimpse of the old Izuku, the kind one, but it was only for a mere millisecond before a Cheshire smile filled with rows of crooked teeth opened slowly, strings of saliva dripping to the floor. No, this wasn't Izuku. It was the devil. Tainted with the many sins of humanity, the taste of heaven but crafted inexplicably for hell. Please, I'll do anything, I beg of you, Izuku, I'm sorry. Eyes deep like blackness, black like a catastrophe, catastrophic like silence, silence like howling. Kirishima saw the cavern of hell. You're a monster, monster, go to hell. Silly Kirishima, this is hell, and I'm the ruler. Damned. What's that noise? It sounds like water. Shush, lower your voices, we don't want to get caught. It's too slow to be water. Hey, where's Kirishima and Bakugo? We should find them again. Who cares, we need to focus on getting ourselves out. Selfish bitch. Oh come on, you were thinking it as well. Stop fighting, let's check out the noise first, then we'll look for a way out. This shit is like a horror movie I watched the other day. No one cares, that's not important. Someone woke up on the wrong side of the bed. Kaminari sighed as he listened to his friends bicker. Admittedly, he was very worried about Bakugo, Kirishima, also Uraraka. The class had heard faraway screams not too long ago. It scared them to their core, so the group was on the move currently. Where, you may ask, they had no fucking clue. Kaminari shakily looked at his phone screen, following silently at the back of the group. The time was still the same, 666. It was rather creepy really, however none of them talked about it. Now thinking about it, Kaminari noticed a few of his classmates were acting strange. Well, they all were, but some more than others. Momo, for example. She was quiet and reserved, keeping to herself more than usual. The boy wondered what was going through her head. Normally, she would try to at least take charge or give suggestions, but that wasn't the case. How abnormal. Speaking off the devil, Momo decided to raise her voice for the first time in a while. Sorry to ask, but does anyone have any food? I'm feeling very malnourished after making. No, of course no one has anything. Yae or Azu, Mina sharply hissed, even surprising Kaminari by her tone. The electric-haired boy looked cautiously at the back of the two girls' heads as they continued walking. Momo was right in front of Denki and Mina was in front of her. They were walking like a line of obedient ducklings following Ida at the front. But I'm hungry. Yeah, we all are, Tsu croaked out, making Yaoyorozu visibly shake. Denki wondered if he should check on her. After all, everyone was stressed. Well, maybe that was an understatement. I need food, the long-haired girl now forced out through clenched teeth, making a few students stop to look at her in surprise. Kaminari cursed under his breath, taking a step back from Momo cautiously as she flexed her fingers and rolled her shoulders back and forth. Hey, why did you guys stop? Ida yelled, but quickly shut his mouth once he saw the scene. Yaoyorozu tilted her head to the side as if listening to some sort of gentle whisper, straining her neck in order to get a better listen. The girl's face contorted, taking on a strange look of anger as she suddenly leapt on Mina without warning. Aghh, get her off, ow! Mina screamed as Yaoyorozu's teeth sank into her forearm, biting down on the flesh and ripping through muscle and ligament. Mina writhed in pain as a lump of her skin was hacked away from her arm and hungrily gulped down by the girl atop her. Screaming now louder, Mina kicked and elbowed Momo's stained face in attempts to escape. Help! Everyone stepped away in shock. Seemingly entranced by the flavors, Momo dived down again to tear another bite from the other's shoulder, splintering her collarbone and crunching down on cartilage like a hungry beast. Kaminari slapped his hand over his mouth in repulsion, blood spraying around the scene like small raindrops of crimson. Mina gargled on her own blood, shock overcoming her nervous system as her body became unbearably numb. Her eyes rolled back to meet the girl's own. She saw tears in Momo's eyes. A slight green glow surrounding her irises, she looked sad but maddened at the same time. The pink-skinned student watched strings of her own skin being torn off in dripping lumps, her eyes becoming blurry, struggle more futile now. Momo slurped up every morsel she skinned from the vying girl's body, licking her bones clear of blood to show off the pearly white of her skeleton. Denki whacked his cheeks and moved his stiff limbs to grab an empty chair which was in a dark classroom to his right, quickly running out with it and mustering up enough strength to whack Yaoyorozu over the head. The girl's body was thrusted sideways, arms and legs going limp as she lost consciousness due to the impact. Kaminari looked down at the mutilated body, his face going pale. Mina had already died by the time Denki saved her, body unable to cope with such overwhelming trauma and blood loss. She was missing chunks of her arms and shoulders above, gouts of blood still flowing from her wounds. Jaw lax as her black eyes were rolled lifelessly to the back of her head, face overcome with the shadow of death, the devil's hand snuffling out her life like a weak match. Mina Hayes, hey, Kaminari knelt down, completely in denial about the whole thing. The class took a step back. What's wrong with you all? Denki screamed, his hand becoming bloodied as he cupped Mina's cold face. Kaminari, don't turn around. The boy raised his brow, eyes fogged with tears. What's wrong, Denki? Why didn't you film her death? You seem to enjoy capturing people's suffering on camera. It's him, I need to run. A glowing blur left Yaoyorozu's unconscious body, hovering behind the blonde's kneeling position, facing the terrified class. Come on, film it. The boy screamed as his body was thrown up into the air by a suffocating amount of force, meeting Izuku's eyes only a few centimeters away from his own. They were black, like Mina's. Izuku's hollow, ghostly eyes created a scene of déjà vu in his mind. The next thing Denki knew, his phone was stuck to his hand, forcefully pointed directly at his dead friend's ripped corpse. Go on, do what you love, film her. The boy wailed and thrashed his limbs in the air. Stop it, you killed her, bastard, bastard. He threw his phone to the floor, shattering the glass everywhere as the rest of the class sprinted to get away from the scene. Kaminari screamed even louder, until the world went quiet. He felt the pressure return to his feet, back on the ground, finally. With caution, Denki slowly opened his eyes. He saw the back of Yaoyorozu's head. In front was Mina. They were walking in a line, silently. But I'm hungry. Denki slapped himself in the face. No. He reached out his hand and tried to grab Momo, to stop her, to pull Mina away. It happened again. He whacked her with a chair. He grieved. But I'm hungry. It happened again. Momo disgustingly mutilated her again. He whacked her with the chair again. He cried, he sobbed, he begged for it to stop. His vision slowly turned red, unable to see anything else apart from blood anymore. But I'm hungry. Again. Kaminari looked one last time towards Mina's cloudy eyes. He dropped the chair to the floor and moved almost robotically towards the wall. Make it stop, he wheezed out, bleeding and blistered hands pressed against his shirt as he began violently crashing his head into the cement wall. Bloody splatters littered the wall, dripping down the paint as Kaminari showed no sign of stopping. A layer of his skin peeled like a ripe fruit from his forehead, leaving small clusters of torn skin on the soiled wall. It looked like the scene from a brutal horror movie. The plaster in the wall started to chip as Denki smashed his head even harder now, the very front of his skull scraping against the wall. He groaned aloud, mumbling incoherent nothings with a final push, body falling backwards in a heap. Izuku clicked his fingers, making the scene disappear. The figures of his classmates floated away in the stale air, except for Yaoyorozu and Mina, of course, because they were real. The ghost smiled at the utter chaos. Tusk, 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 such a shame, eh? He bent down and fiddled with a clumpy strand of blonde hair, twirling it in his translucent fingers before flicking it dismissively to the floor again. What a pitiful, lonely end, Izuku sighed, putting on a fake frown, grabbing Kaminari's hand and heaving his body to rest next to Mina's, after doing the same with Yaoyorozu's, so they were all lined up like a stack of sardines. He took pleasure in seeing their faces lifeless and doll-like. In fact, they were sort of pretty. He wanted to remember this moment. So Izuku bent down and roughly grabbed a hold of Mina's ruffled pink hair, digging his fingers into the bottom of her chin till he could feel the edge of her jaw. With a wide grin, Izuku tore off the skin on her face, leaving only the muscles and eyeballs in her skull, a hanging piece of flesh dripping from the ghost's hand as he repeated the same process with Denki and Momo. 5 down, 15 to go. Smile, my dear. A mother's sorrow is undeniably the most tragic thing you can witness. It was like watching the parent's soul being torn away from their body, replaced by a horrible emptiness which one can never really refill. The loss of a child will always create an open wound, ready to be torn off again at any mention of the lost child. And that was exactly what was happening. Aizawa sighed as Inko began to bawl her eyes out in the middle of the restaurant he had taken her to, just to discuss a few things. However, not even 5 minutes into the conversation, she broke down completely. Miss Midoriya, I'm so sorry for your loss. Shota forced out. He wasn't really the ideal person for compassion, hell, even more so now that his kill count was up to 2 bodies, and still the teacher yearned for more. She sniffled and looked up at him with red-dimmed eyes, shoulders tense. You were the only one nice to my boy. He always came home and told me how amazing you were to him. Tears continued to fall down her cheeks as she spoke. Aizawa was taken aback. He thought you were one of the most amazing people in the world. Izuku was never treated nicely by anyone because of his quirk. What? His quirk was amazing though, Shota interrupted, pushing his sleek black hair behind his ear to get a better look at the distraught lady. Her eyes widened, in turn the sobs getting louder. Yes, my baby was so talented. Shota looked out of the window. If only he could tell her that she was able to see Izuku again. But this time it would be as a ghost, not to mention the fact he was literally putting a whole school through unimaginable torture as they spoke. I trust you already know what happened to him. Aizawa spoke in an unusually calm tone, nodding to the waiter as his coffee was placed on the table as they spoke. Inko looked down at her trembling hands and nodded solemnly, making the hero take a long sip of his drink and set it down with a subtle groan. I'm sorry you had to know of such a fate. It was truly indistinguishable. The mother's puffy eyes glanced at Aizawa's stoic face. I can't even have a funeral because he's marked as missing. It's just so unfair, it makes me angry. The woman scrunched her fists and allowed her sleek green hair to cover the swollen redness of her cheeks. I understand, Miss Midoriya. Without warning, Inko snapped her head forward to make intense eye contact with the opposite male. But I need you to help me, that's why I've come here. She took her phone out and slammed it against the table, making Shota's coffee ripple softly at the impact. The teacher looked at her phone, on it a small voice recording. What's this? He asked curiously, to which Inko responded with a determined frown. I went to meet All Might to get answers, you see. Aizawa's eyes widened a little behind his long strands of hair, memories of how Izuku had quite cleverly framed the hero into a horrible crime that day of the sports festival. Did she know something about this? Did she know about him? If so, Shota would have to kill he. I recorded our conversation, where All Might admitted to UA covering up my baby's death. Back at UA, the young ghost was having quite a ball teasing the remaining classmates roaming the desolate halls of their once happy school, occasionally peeking his head out of corners just to scare the shit out of them. However, as of right now, Midoriya was doing some, let's say, arts and crafts. Izuku fiddled with the hollow sockets he peeled from the faces of his 3 classmates, fiddling around with the skin in order to smoothen it out perfectly. The ghost's tongue peeked from his pale lips in concentration, eyebrows furrowed as he stretched the face over a collection of 3 teddy bears. The sight was gnarly, hollow holes where the students' eyes used to be replaced with the black beads of the stuffed animal, the fur underneath the skin making its texture slightly bumpy. Izuku grinned, glowing eyes scrunched as he lined them all up with small hiccups of excitement. It's like having their friends back again. I'm so nice, but they're all so ungrateful, right, Kaminari? The dead boy floated down to the ground and sat cross-legged next to the teddy bear with Dinky's face. He picked it up and stared into the black pupils. Somehow they reminded him of Nezu's beady eyes. You look so cute like this, Aha. Who should I give you to? Maybe Gyro. She'd love to have her friend back, Izuku exclaimed with strange delight, mouth curled tightly upwards, a deranged, psychotic look present in his eyes. Izuku set the teddy bear down with the affirmative nod, picking up the bear with Mina after "I'll give you to." Oh, how about Iida? He'd love that. And Momo, Todoroki can have you, the ghost giggled, eerily twitching occasionally in sadistic happiness. It was as if he was giving presents on Christmas Eve, just a small taster before the big thing that is. Izuku still had to find Katsuki first after all. It seemed the blonde had separated himself from the group. For once, it was a clever move on his part. What a pain, what a pain, the ghost growled to himself and grabbed all the teddies and phased through his ceiling to look for the group first. We should find Bakugo, Takayami piped up for the first time in a while. It was strange not having Dark Shadow with him, sort of like a void in his soul, or rather an endless pit. Iida, who was still leading, shook his head, shuffling around in some cupboards as everyone was scouring Nezu's empty office in search of some useful tools. Not like it would do much anyways. The remaining classmates had resorted to trying to find anything for protection or maybe some sort of navigation. Their school felt like an endless fortress. Each time Iida thought they knew where they were going, another corridor or dead end would appear out of nowhere. What was worse was the fact there was hardly any light. We have to focus on ourselves. Bakugo is more than capable to protect himself, the class rep yelled, his stern face scrunched in visible fear and terror which he was trying to hold back desperately. Hey, found something, Sue croaked, holding up a little old-fashioned tape. She handed it hurriedly to Iida and hunched her back as he inspected it. On the rear was a message. Written in a strange, goopy, black liquid was, "Play me." The letters were still fresh, staining the male's hand in an inky coal-like color. It felt disgusting, little unknown lumps in the liquid. Iida didn't really want to find out what it was. Kiro, what should we do? The girl wondered. It felt strange without Uraraka. The two were rather close. Asui simply wishes she was safe. She didn't know that the girl was very much the opposite, still suspended from the canteen ceiling. A false hope. Nezu must have something in here to play it. Keep looking, everyone, he ordered, holding up the tape so everyone could get a look at it. Everyone complied, still shuffling through drawers and even looking underneath the deceased principal's desk. Around 5 minutes later, Gyro surprised everyone with a little tape player found under some books on a shelf. The class made quick work of connecting it to a little projector which was running on a little bit of electricity. It must have been planned, since all electrical items had been cut off. Iida shook his head and tried to stay on task, everyone gathering around as he slid the tape inside. There were matters much more important than figuring out why this device still had some electricity. The air filtered to another tense silence as the projector processed the tape for a few moments, only building the tension even more. Ida tensed as a small image popped up on the wall. It was in black and white, small pops and crackles filtering into the room, incessant scratching gnawing at their ears. It looked almost retro, the black and white background flashing on and off before distorted screams was the next thing heard. Shoto stared stoically at the light, his fists clenched white. Honestly, he had never really made fun of Izuku, nor had he belittled the young bat boy's death. He was more someone who just observed, along with many like Sato, Ajiro, and others. However, Todoroki wouldn't consider himself innocent at all. He had watched the Green-Eat endure horrific acts of bullying and torment from his classmates, but as usual Shoto turned a blind eye. So Todoroki only hoped his death would be quick. After all, he had figured out it was inevitable. But the dual-quirked male silently followed along with the class nonetheless. A little figuration of fuzzy dots forming a figure upon the screen finally snapped the male out of his daze. It was almost like a line of stars trying to form a constellation of some sort of person in a chair. The faraway yells had ceased now, replaced with strained heavy breathing. The whole atmosphere was unsettling. Almost like feeling spiders crawl under your clothes unknowingly, their little legs clawing silent paths along goosebumped skin. The classroom was thick with the stench of sweat and stress, carbon dioxide building, and causing the inhabitants to quicken their breaths unknowingly. Finally, the image had become clear enough to make out what was happening. A person, more like a middle-aged woman, sat as still as stone. Face stretched into such a straight, unwavering, paper-thin smile it was terrifying. Midnight. Her hair was a complete mess, hero costume completely pristine apart from her arm. All the white fabric had been stripped and clawed away from her forearm in an erratic fashion, her bare skin dripping blood slowly to the floor. The injury was hard to see from the angle of which it was filmed, but it didn't look like any ordinary wound. The veins on her hands and up the elbow were pulsating with a strange black brewing from underneath the surface. It looks like the same stuff that was on the tape, Ida thought in shock, looking at his stained hands. Midnight held her forced smile, eyes squinted. Eyelids flickered unevenly, fingertips twitching with every pulse and drip of the blood in her arm. The hero looked to be in unimaginable pain, though she could hardly show it, for whatever reason. Sue thought her eardrums might burst second from the overwhelming silence, except for Midnight's pained breaths and uneven whimpers of pain, her body convulsing as those black veins slowly spread throughout the hero's body. Her smile continued to grow, and with it another fuzzy voice. "My friend DS," it broke up, followed by a long static noise before returning again. "Midnight is having so," the sound buzzed out again. "So much fu fun." The yelling attacked the class in their deepest conscience. It was petrifying, the feeling you would get staring into the face of death, and well, quite frankly, they could have been doing just that. "I am some of you RGUNN, I have fun too." Midnight began to shake more violently, her grin widening so the corners of her mouth wrinkled unnaturally. Almost like a puppet, as if someone had attached invisible strings to her face and was straining the skin more and more. Her eyes watered unbearably, gurgles of pain and suffering seethed through clenched teeth. The gloopy black mass now reached Midnight's neck, her skin bubbling with bulbous hives of that same liquid, spreading like flies to a light source. Some of you will have fun, just like OUR, tech teacher." Many students began to feel overly nauseous, some even turning away and vomiting up whatever was left of their empty stomach onto the floor while trying to block out the noise. "Turn it off, Ida." Midnight's mouth began to bleed and trickle blood from the sides, her smile being stretched so far it was beginning to tear apart piece by piece, white foam frothing and dripping down the woman's chin. Ida ignored them, eyes strained towards the gruesome display. "We need to figure out what to do. It's a clue," he yelled back in protest, face turning slightly red. Everyone flinched and shielded their view as the hero's eyes started to bulge from their sockets and dilute before exploding with a simple pop, along with all the hives around her skin veins rupturing to release the black liquid which inhibited her body. Finally, she looked to be in peace, her heaving chest lax, agonized gasps halted. Though the ghastly sight of her empty eye sockets and caved-in skin was a thing of nightmares, body hanging limp in the chair, that grin still nailed to her face. Figure out who it is or die the same fate. The projection glitched erratically again, flashing different hues of greens before it switched off completely. Now this was definitely not the peaceful end Todoroki had hoped for. Well, we can't all get what we want now, can we? Illness. Tamaki sat shivering outside of UA. Arms wrapped like a protective blanket around his chest and shoulders, toes and hands so cold and sore he was sure they'd brittly fall off. It reminded him of the funny question Izuku had asked him the other day before he disappeared into UA to carry out his duties. Would you rather have fingers on your feet or toes on your hands? Personally, I would have fingers on my feet so I could smoke using my foot, don't ask. Tamaki thought it was a strange question at the time, but now he wasn't so sure now, because it literally felt like his limbs were about to snap off and become bird food. I mean, no one wants to become bird food, right? Well, maybe you do. I'm not one to judge someone's life ambitions, considering I'm writing this in the psyche ward. Shota had left him ages ago to talk with that woman, so he was here alone in the freezing, cold, desolate, and quiet school, haunted by a literal ghost. Could this get any worse? Honestly, it probably could. Tamaki could have been inside that school for all he knew, but here he was, away from the dangerous claws of Izuku's wrath. So maybe sitting in the cold wasn't too bad. But still, he was fucking terrified. Sure, he came to an agreement with the dead boy, but still he was sitting in the dark by himself. If Tamaki had learnt anything from horror movies, it was that this was the worst possible situation ever. Amajiki was literally the side character who gets left on patrol by themselves and gets killed by the murder first, he thought. Fuck, was this great? Tamaki shivered and rubbed his hands together quickly, breath coming out as hot puffs of steam in the chilling air, the tips of his pointed ears red as well as his cheeks and nose. The third year tried to convince himself all these silly thoughts were just a result of his usual anxiety and paranoia. But almost as soon as a bird in a nearby tree flew off in a hurry, Tamaki sprinted faster out of that school than Tenya fucking Iida on goddamn steroids. Yeah, no, that was his breaking point. Hell no. At this point, Tamaki was willing to have fingers on his feet if it meant running away from the school faster. Seemingly frozen, Iida stared at the powered-off projector, his gaze cold and stone-like. They had just watched a pro-hero die by some sort of fast-working disease. It reminded some students of the Black Plague, but this was so much more surreal than that virus, though. This was something unhinged, unknown. Everyone was silent in thought and shock. The very first signs of this disease was black veins and possibly even a smile. Many thought, could the disease be passed on? Would they have to kill those with the symptoms before they could pass it on? Either way, it was better not to take the chance. This was kill or be killed. And no one was planning on dying. This simple little message had turned everyone against each other. Izuku really was playing games with their mind. That glitched, eerie voice, that one statement they all replayed, find out who it is or suffer the same fate. That must have meant someone was infected, and they had to be terminated before it could spread. An intense air of distrust spread between each of them, eyes flashing between one another with caution. Iida slowly crept to the front of the classroom, straying away from everyone else. The remaining class did the same, each distanced. The atmosphere deepened as a sudden newfound determination gripped the survivor's consciousness. Sue took a deep breath and backed into a nearby desk, grabbing a pen behind her back as a precaution. Others also silently fumbled around for any means of self-preservation. Clearing his throat, the class rep decided to take the lead as usual. "Everyone, hold out your arms," he ordered in a weak voice, strong facade slipping away piece by piece, weakness permeating itself into his tone. He was planning on checking everyone for any sights of black veins, as it seemed to be very prominent on midnight. Gyro was the first to do so, slowly followed by others like Sato, Todoroki, and the remaining. Strangled, tense breathing circulated the room as each person tried to focus their eyesight to make out the details of each person's arms in the dark lighting. However, in their inspection, everyone failed to notice the dim glow of green light at the back of the room, followed by the appearance of 3 neatly lined teddy bears. Simply a little present from their former classmate is all. Katsuki had never felt so terrified in his life. He was curled underneath a table in the dank, quiet defines of what used to be the practical room for Meihatsum, though now it was merely a place of his resignation now. Who knows what happened to the eccentric pink-haired girl? Katsuki didn't want to think about it. The blonde used to think of himself as a hero, fearless and brave, ready to take on any threat at any given moment, but now, Bakugo wasn't so confident about his arrogance anymore. The teen's mind was playing tricks on itself, driving erratically to pluck the strings of his amygdala in a constant retelling of the dismembering process Izuku had inflicted on him. The tearing of flesh, splintering bone, burning ligaments, streams of blood, constant death and resurrection. Katsuki was drenched in sweat just thinking about it, as if his body remembered the feelings exactly like some sort of torturous muscle memory. The blonde twitched in his strained position regularly, cramps attacking his legs and back from stress and lack of mobility. It felt as if bones had no more strength and muscles were all out of power. The elevating primal fear made Katsuki's head throb violently against the walls of his skull, logic and self-control decreasing by the second. Katsuki's heart pounded irregularly, pulsing in his throat as he quaked silently at the sounds of his own trembling breaths, paranoid that he might hear them, and, well, the teen's paranoia was quite justified this time. KCCHN. The blonde was suddenly encased in what felt like unbreakable concrete. The air thickened and coated his lungs as a rancid tar. Horror clasped its cold grip around Bakugo's guts as the boy instantly stopped breathing, body squeezed tighter under the confines of the table. God, Katsuki wished he had chosen a better hiding place now. Izuku's words were fragmented purposefully, his unannounced, echoey voice circuiting the teen's brain on repeat. That stupid, childhood name. Katsuki hated it. He despised the word with every cell and atom in his body. This feels like deja vu, you know, when you and Kirishima hid from me also, remember. Izuku's drearily glowing, red shoes came into Katsuki's tunneled view, the ghost's footsteps having a slight taunting skip to them, as if he was playing some sort of sick, twisted game. You watch me slowly drain the life out of his weak body. Bakugo wrapped his arms around his sweat-soaked hair and shook his head violently, trying to get the image out of his mind. Kirishima's petrified expression in the mere moments before his death, how he screamed and begged for Bakugo to save him. So much for being a hero, you just stood there cackling. I know. Izuku stopped his steps, turning on the heels of his foot to point directly to the table Katsuki took refuge under. Slowly, oh so ever tauntingly, the dead boy crouched down to the floor with a shallow grin, his gnarly face gradually coming to view. Katsuki stifled a cry by biting his lip in terror, those cold, stoned eyes digging holes into his very being. Sweat dribbled down his nose as Izuku tilted his head to the side with an unwavering stare. No snarky comeback, Kakin, have I broken you already? Izuku wondered, almost disappointed yet pleased. Katsuki shook his head, a little blood dripping from his lips. He couldn't find the courage to talk, let alone argue with his childhood friend, how much he would give to just rewind time, go back to before he killed Izuku. Let me show you a few memories. The green-haired ghost knelt down so his translucent legs were crossed underneath each other, tattered school uniform hanging raggedly on his ghastly frame. Bakugo was unsettled, with the calmness Izuku inhibited as he outstretched a hand and revealed a small flicker of light. It came from his palm, little streaks of shining light hovering above the spirit's hand. Katsuki cleared the wetness away from his eyes in order to watch the light slowly take an interesting form. Izuku grinned madly, watching the blonde's facial expressions with utmost hyperfixation. Katsuki felt his chest tighten as a little flowing image of him and Izuku formed unexpectedly. They were children, faces bright with sweet innocence, before the quirks, before the bullying. Their limbs floated together peacefully, smiles overshadowing faint childish laughter which could hardly be heard if it weren't for the inexplicable silence in the practical room. "We were so happy," Izuku whispered melancholy, tweaking the flowing image slightly so his child self now had the attributes of his quirk. The light in Izuku's hand seemed to fade a little as the blonde child became surrounded with faceless friends around him, pointing and laughing silently at the mutated Izuku. "You decided to let your ego take over completely. Amazing." Little Katsuki with the excellent quirk never experienced the repercussions to his own actions. The ghost's hand visibly closed a little in anger, the image flickering a little as he did so, causing it to further morph into something more sinister. Now it was just Bakugo, but grown as he was currently. That memorable night Katsuki tried so hard to forget, Izuku's burnt wings in his hands, face horror-stricken, as if a direct snap shot in time. "I suffered when it should have been you. I'm merely returning the favor." Izuku took a deep breath, suddenly snapping his hand shut, causing the light to completely disappear. Katsuki looked slowly into the ghost's eyes, aware of the growing anger which seethed off the spirit in strong waves. There was no escape from the reminiscent of nightmares he'd felt so trapped within for months. There would be no way out of this. He had endured countless deaths, repeated torture, pain, so Katsuki decided he should be selfish one last time. "Just kill me, please." Swan dive. Izuku looked into Katsuki's hopeless, dull red eyes. What once was full of wrath and confidence burnt down to mere fear and regret. The ghost stood up wordlessly and started to shrink, his body black, lifeless eyes slowly morphing into his previous emerald green, the image of Katsuki's childhood friend. A small glowing toddler with the innocence of 1,000, his aspirations and kindness high, a smile and soft, welcoming hand greeted Bakugo at the door, waiting for him in silence. Perhaps he was dreaming again. He wouldn't be surprised if this was all a thing in his mind. After all, most of the torment so far had been. Bakugo just wanted it to be over. He wanted to go home. He wanted to apologize. Apologize to Inko, seek forgiveness from Izuku, even if he knew there was none left. Midoriya was but a hollow shell of his kind former self. Though when Katsuki looked at him, that little toddler with a becoming smile, the blonde felt comfortable for once. He wanted to jump into the boy's arms, even if his body would warp and fade at contact. Katsuki swiped away his tears, standing up on shaky legs and taking cautious steps towards the hallway. The only light provided was an ill green shine resting almost angelically on the child's body. Izuku's small hand swished almost hypnotically in the air. Katsuki dragged himself towards him, body and mind utterly exhausted. It felt as if someone had taken a hoover to his skull and completely drained his insides till he was left nothing but a shell of regret. Bakugo dragged his sweat-soaked sleeve across his face to wipe away tears and mucus. He looked an absolute disaster, but that was the least of his worries right now. Was Izuku going to comply to his request and actually kill him? "Come on, Kaken, let's play." The dark surroundings suddenly melted and formed a beautiful summer's day. Youthful giggles permeated through the clear air. They belonged to Izuku and him. They were sweet, innocent in a newborn animal type of way. Inko perched on an oak wood bench. A slender woman with oceans of long green hair tumbled over her shoulders, fanning around her back in the gentle breeze which screamed euphoria. Her eyes were strained on two children, lips singed into a smile. "Hey wait, slow down," a spiked-hair boy complained, fists whitening while climbing up a red ladder to keep up with his excitable friend, throwing himself on the top of the climbing frame with a pant. Katsuki looked shakily down at his hands. They were small and pudgy, sweat beading the little palms. Honestly, at this point the boy shouldn't be surprised at all. Not at the fact he was literally a child, nor how he couldn't even control his own body or speech. This had happened aplenty times, another one of Deku's sick tricks. But the thing was, should he take it seriously this time? The air felt different, not like in that school of horrors. Nearby, a large TV screen plastered on a skyscraper projected a news report. People gathered like clusters of flies to a nightlight, eyes glued to the blonde woman replaying a video of the recently convicted All Might in prison, having a conversation with a woman who was out of view. Katsuki felt himself twisted between two realities. On one hand, there was the real world, the present tense, but at the same time, here he and Izuku were, toddlers on a playground. His friend's voice rang in the background, light-hearted and nostalgic. The recording continued to play, apparently submitted anonymously into both the Hero Agency and multiple branded news agencies across Tokyo. "Don't lie to me, please, I just want to know the truth," a broken voice wept, disjointed and lost. The camera swerved quickly, catching a glimpse of All Might chained in his cell, whole body littered in quirk suppressants, heavy-duty tempered glass and iron. Well, long story short, it was accidental manslaughter. A bunch of kids ganged up on him one night and took it too far. We hid the body out of precaution for UA. Guess that doesn't matter anymore since it could be potentially shut down anyways. The recording stopped. That was all the evidence needed. The newswoman reappeared, her black eyes flared with something between betrayal and worry for Izuku, the so-called missing boy, potentially but not likely. Everyone had forgotten. The posters with his smile and tufts of green hair claiming rewards for safe return blown away on the streets, disregarded and stepped on. But now, his proclaimed death had shed a new light on the corrupt nature of the amazing UA Hero School. An insight to the mind of someone everyone looked up to, an idol and protector. The hero civilians cheered and trusted. Katsuki felt his bones chill with dread as the stacks of people watching only multiplied, their expressions a mixture of anger and sadness. Some quirks released haphazardly in the crowd, spouts of ice, lengthened limbs, gouts of wind, and floating rubbish becoming unveiled in the horrible news. If there was no heroes to trust, then what would become of the whole of Japan? This single thought process seemed to go haywire in almost everyone's mind, spurring them into panic. The little red-eyed boy could see the chaos slowly unraveling. Everywhere, the news was absolutely everywhere. Tearing his gaze off the screen, Bakugo sucked in a breath and felt his small feet pad against the sandy playground floor. Drawing closer to the green-haired boy sat cross-legged, drawing on the ground with a small twig. "Deku," he forced out, throat ragged and torn. The other didn't look up, only continuing humming with a smile, eyes glued to the illustrations. "What the fuck have you done?" he said breathlessly, coming close enough to peer down at Izuku's handiwork. On it there was the numbers 1 to 15 all neat in a row, and every once in a while, he crossed one off with two eerily straight lines. "Kaken, don't say words like that, Mama will get mad," Izuku mumbled, pointing a small finger at the unmoving lady. Katsuki's esophagus constricted, a lump crawling up his throat at his uncanny tone of voice. Then, Bakugo's stubby legs brought him towards Inko, who looked still enough to be a frozen in time. Reaching out his hand, Katsuki stretched for Inko's delicate hand resting gently on her knee, and instantly her body dissipated into the darkening sky, thick with shouts and protest from panicked people. "I'm not here. I'm. You're right, Kaken, you're not." That same uncanny voice cutting in, tearing the words out of Katsuki's throat as the realization dawned on him. "But this is happening, I'm just helping you see the truth, your actions are what lead to this." Izuku stood up from his seated position, dragging his stick behind him in a slow, lingering pace. The boy pointed towards the stray pro-heroes who were trying fruitlessly to calm the rampaging civilians down, all the while they demanded answers be given and justice served. Katsuki stared at a building which had just gone up in flames after someone's quirk reacted with another, the blare of fire engines in the distance becoming louder with screams tuning into each other like an apocalyptic orchestra. My poor mother, so distraught over the loss you caused her, created this mess to avenge my death. Oh, it all stems from you, Kaken. Why don't you just... Izuku paused, dropping his stick, and in that moment the world seemed to dull. Sounds mushed and buffering together in a mellow hum. For a second, Katsuki considered there was actually small flies hammering against his skull. That was until a cool breeze washed over his face. Opening the eyes that seemed pinned together, Katsuki peered down at what looked like scattering ants running from an exterminator, his toes dangling like bait to a hungry fish over a perilous edge. Take a swan dive off the roof of a building. Trust wasn't even a word Class 1A and be associated with anymore. Izuku had been gone for quite some time, though both classes made it painfully clear that he was not needed for chaos to erupt again. Their two scenes almost mirrored the outside world, utterly crazed in their need for survival and escape, that they were willing to do anything. In the end, no one could rely on quirks the way they would have in the real world. It was all raw power, like a test of primal instinct lodged deep inside the brain which needed to be dug out. It was a mind game, like most of our favorite ghosts' tricks and torture was. No one had the disease like midnight, absolutely no one. In fact, it wasn't even contagious, as it was concocted by Izuku's own hand and made to scare and disassociate from reality. But the occupants of the remaining Class 1A seemed to think otherwise. They simply saw what they wanted to, killed whom they thought would be a danger to themselves and their survival. And, in the end, they brought their fate upon themselves, damned each other for such stupid reasons like they did Izuku that night in the alley. Sure, it wasn't all of them, but they each played a part. Bodies littered the flowers of A and B, some still straggling for breath and heaving themselves across the ground in search for any savior. A cloud of death and hate veiled thickly across the dark school, suffocating any living morsel. Todoroki had rolled onto his back, weakly holding his side, which had been impaled in the struggle that ensued after Iida claimed to see the black veins on Tsu. Everyone had gone completely mad after he said so. Now, Iida himself was laying half-draped over a desk with fragments of his skull pooling the floor beneath him. The dual-haired boy wondered how it had come to this all, how even he, in a desperate attempt to live, had ended multiple of his friends' lives. Maybe, instead of just watching Midoriya endure such discrimination, he could have stepped in, and perhaps his future would have played out differently. Shoto took a deep breath, every nerve in his body screaming to not do so as another gout of thick, warm blood leaked from his wound. He wanted to be a hero, prove to his father that he could be better, kinder than him. But as Todoroki stared up at the abyss of a ceiling painted in the odd splatter of red, there really was no difference between him and Endeavor. Letting his hand slide away weakly from the wound, Shoto felt his eyes grow heavy, the flow of blood around his body slowing by the minute as his heart became weaker. At the same time, the boy heard several more of his fatting classmates release one last breath into the stale air. Todoroki guessed it was his time too, so with a parched sigh, his head hung to the side, cheek pressed against the cold floor in a final, long sleep. What's wrong? You begged me for it just a minute ago. Now I'm letting you kill yourself by your own accord. Izuku floated just in front of Katsuki, his green body hovering in the air, which led to a dangerous drop. Just looking at the distance, it would be impossible for anyone to survive a fall like that. Maybe that was a good thing, however, Katsuki thought. That way the worry of being alive and dying a painful death wouldn't be in the back of his mind. Once the floor was close enough, it'll be all over in a second. Everything would be quiet. Bakugo could sleep forever without nightmares this time. That thought brought the boy unexplainable peace. To rest with no tomorrow, no today, no yesterday. It really didn't sound all that bad. Your life here is over, Kaken, just give up. Izuku beckons like a mermaid, leading his very own sailor to their watery grave so they could be together for all eternity. Forever. Needles prickled at every fiber in Katsuki's body, being so close to reckless death, making his brain scream its flight response. It took every fiber of his being not to run away and hide again. Sweat caked the blonde's forehead and underarms, and one bead of the salty liquid rolled off his nose and fell down the building. Bakugo imagined that drop to be himself, free and careless. Everyone hates you now, your own family, heroes, the public. You'll never become a hero, so what meaning does your life have now, your useless kakin? Exhaling another hot breath, Katsuki curled his back and slowly slipped his index finger into the back of both his shoes, tugging them off and placing the trainers neatly together by his feet. Then Izuku watched him fall. 20 years later. New way, that's just an old tall tale, PSH, who would believe that? A small boy whined, shaking his head of brown hair in denial. Why do you think that building has been abandoned and closed off for years and years since the disaster? Said an old man who scratched at his stubbly jaw of graying hairs. The younger shrunk back a little at his piercing gaze. The red rims around this man's blackened eyes made him want to recoil and run away. It was true that the old school had been boarded off for as long as the boy had been alive, but all the adults claimed it was simply uninhabitable due to gas leaks that ensued after the protests. The heroes didn't want anyone to know the horrors which went down in that school, so it's been untouched since. I tell you, he's still there in the halls of that school. The man leaned forward, wiry black hair streaking around his hunched shoulders and stale frown. Shaking his head, the boy stepped away fearfully. I need to get going, Mr. T. Thank you for sparing your time. Standing up straight, he moved the scarf around his shoulders and sniffed, Call me Aizawa, boy. The end.